What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 285. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. Joining me on the line, the other one. He's in Denver, Colorado. It's Scott-Vargas. LSV, what's going on, buddy?
Kind of on a fever pitch for Modern Masters here. I've prepared more for this Grand Prix than I have for most, and we will talk about that later in the show. But this Grand Prix is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited for it as well. Of course, this show is brought to you every week by channelfireball.com, and they're also bringing you the Grand Prix. We were talking, of course, about Grand Prix Las Vegas, although there are also two other GPs happening on that same weekend. There's one in Utrecht, and there's also one in Chiba. And this is going to be, it's kind of like this make magic history. Like Wizards of the Coast has blown this thing out of the water. I know you guys at Channel Fireball have put a lot of effort into this weekend as well as sort of the headliner event for it. There's now effectively two GPs. I saw that, John Sasso tweeted that it's over 7,000 people now. So the thing just keeps going, and we still got, a little over a week left until this thing goes. You can find information if you are trying to book a last minute. If you just said, you know what, screw it, I'm going, I don't care. You can find information at grandprixlasvegas.com. Is that what it was, Luis? Is it
grandprixlasvegas.com?
Yeah, okay. It's Grand Prix Vegas, right?
Yeah, grandprixvegas.com.
Yeah, that's what it is. I've said it a bunch of times, and when I said that, it clicked. I'm like, no, that's what it is. I know it. Yeah, so grandprixvegas.com, so you can pre-register and get all the information. Of course, we're also going to be broadcasting it, right? So there's a live video broadcast from all the GPs, and both of them in Vegas. There's a team for Channel Fireball who's going to be broadcasting it. I'm going to be broadcasting it on the Wizards side of that same thing. So there's going to be a ton of Magic content if you can't make it out. And we certainly hope you'll join us. It should be a really great event.
We actually are, one of our people doing commentary is a very popular streamer who has not done a ton of commentary, and this will be one of his first gigs in the booth here. So we'll see who that is next week.
Yeah, I may or may not know who you're talking about.
Marshall streamed a few days ago, so he might be talking about himself.
I haven't streamed that much, yeah. I have been in the booth a lot, though. Limited Resources is also brought to you by Patreon. That is you, the listener. If you find that you get a lot of value out of the show, if it's something that you found worth your time and you'd like to give back in some way, you can do so at patreon.com/limited resources. It's very easy to do. It just takes it automatically. You can set the amount you want, any amount. You'll get a thank you card for signing up. And if you go up the tiers, you get a few extra bonuses as well. And one of the things that we like to do with the Patreon is we have a Patreon question taken only from the patrons. They get to submit questions and we choose one from it. I have one here from Josh V. And this is a topical question because this is, of course, the episode where we're going to be talking about Modern Masters 2015. This is the set primer for it. It is not a full set review where we go over every card. We figured it would be a better use of our time and yours to do a set primer since, for the most part, we figure our listeners aren't going to be drafting this set often. They'll probably draft it once or twice and then kind of be done with it. I mean, it's $10 a pack if you want to do it in real life, however much that equals, for a draft at your local shop or with your friends. And it can add up really quickly. So this is kind of one of those sets that you get to dip your toe in, you get to play for a little bit, but probably aren't going to get a chance to just grind out a whole bunch of drafts on. So we decided to do a set primer for it. And Josh wants to know, as an exclusively standard/limited player, I have a couple Modern Masters draft and sealed tournaments coming up in my nearby game store. So it looks like Josh is pre-regged for a couple of those. And like I said, I think your typical player is going to play those and then that'll be it. He says, is it possible for me to be competitive in a crowd of people familiar with the power level of cards in Modern? Or do these people have an experience advantage I can't possibly beat? What do you think, Luis?
I think that you do get a bit of an advantage by knowing the cards, the first time they came around. But honestly, if you kind of treat this as a new set, I mean, everyone's on a roughly equal footing when a new set comes out in terms of knowing the cards. And if you read the spoiler, if you take a look at a review show such as this, or I'm doing full set reviews on Channel Fireball, like you can read a little bit about the cards, it's not that big of an advantage because a lot of it is the previous context of the cards is just not the same. So someone might know how a card worked in the original format it was, but there's a lot of cards in this set that are just played very differently than they used to. So it's not like that carries over necessarily. And honestly, you can still just read cards. Like when your opponent plays a card and you read it, I think you're going to get what it does. I don't think this is so drastically different than a normal limited format that people who played with these cards beforehand have a huge advantage.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, what you were describing is basically they get to shortcut reading the card and knowing it by sight, but they don't get to shortcut knowing what it does in this context, and you're going to be on equal footing there. So, yeah, I think, no. They do not have an advantage that can't possibly be beat. I think you can beat them definitely. And, this is the type of thing that you need to do that is read Luis's reviews and listen to this show. That's just going to give you a big advantage. I mean, I've learned a lot just from prepping for the show, right? I mean, I had to go over the spoiler a bunch of times, make a bunch of notes. I did some sealed pools just to get a feel for what a pool looks like. Now, these weren't real sealed pools, but still, they were kind of auto-generated. And just to give you a feel, like you don't want to put too many eggs in that particular basket, but it does give you a nice idea for what they're going to look like. And I think that's where you're going to get your edge. It's not in, having knowledge of the cards ahead of time. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go over the main archetypes for Modern Masters 2015. So the primer is going to break down into two main pieces. The first one is we're going to go over the archetypes. And basically the way it breaks down is that each color pair has its own archetype that it kind of wants you to be in. We also we kind of combined a couple of them too. There's a kind of a 3+ color deck as well that we shoehorned into one of the 2 color archetypes. But I think before we get into it, go ahead.
One quick note.
Sure.
Does anyone still use shoehorns? Because I don't know anyone who actually owns a shoehorn.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm actually not glad you brought that up at all.
It seems very relevant to the show right now. We use the term shoehorned a lot, but how many of our listeners even really know what a shoehorn is?
I don't think I've ever used one in my whole life, but
well, there we go.
So. It is a turn of phrase that is acceptable, I think, even if you haven't actually held a shoehorn in your hand.
It's also a smooth, slightly curved object that helps you slide your heel into a tight-fitting shoe.
Thank you, Luis, for that.
I kind of shoehorned that in.
You certainly did. Jeez, more like jackhammered that one in. But what we're going to do is go over each of these color pairs. But I do want to note before we dive in that the archetypes that we're going to describe in these 2 color pairs aren't the only thing you can do in the 2 color pairs. They're just sort of the overarching theme that you'll see with these. And they do kind of encourage you down that road. But as we've seen in the past, even in the first Modern Masters set, you did not have to do exactly what those 2 color pairs were telling you to do. There was a lot of flexibility. A lot of them had 2 sort of different looks to them. There was certain cards that you could build around, and it would change the complexion of how your deck looked. So don't put all your eggs in this basket of like, this 2 color, blue-white is Affinity or whatever. And then that's all I'm going to think about. Some of them want you to be more dedicated to what they are, and some of them don't, but you do need to stay flexible in it. Another thing I want to note before we dive in is, Luis, we haven't drafted this yet, right? And while we're going to talk about what the predicted color pairs are doing and the cards that we think are good, things are going to change. And it's hard for us to try to predict exactly how the power level of these things are going to break down without having done any actual events yet. So we're going to kind of avoid trying to rank these in any type of order.
Yeah, I think we can fairly accurately describe what each color combination, like their granted archetype, because these are specifically baked into the set, is trying to do, and what the key cards are, given that we can evaluate the cards. But if you had to ask me to rank all 10, I would not be able to give you a high confidence ranking, so I'd rather just not do that.
Right. Okay, so let's dive in. Where should we start here? Should we start with blue-red elementals?
Seems like an elemental place to start.
Okay, let's do that. All right, so blue-red elementals is a creature type. This is and we should probably mention where they took these from, just in case people have drafted or seen these formats before. This was from Lorwyn, right?
Yeah, in most cases you'll see the majority of them coming from Lorwyn, with a couple like standouts that didn't come from those sets sometimes, just because it's kind of cool that a specific card it does fit the theme but is not necessarily from that set.
Yeah. So With elementals, we're talking about the creature type elemental, which from Lorwyn was, of course, a tribal set. It had to do with what creature type your creatures, and sometimes even not creature cards, were due to the ability changeling and tribal instants and sorceries, which we saw. So that ended up being one of the kind of headliner tribes from there was elementals, and you get some really great cards out of elementals. So a couple of the cards that jumped out to me were cards like Mulldrifter. I mean, I know that you and I are both massive Mulldrifter fans. It's just one of the better cards they've ever made. Spite Bellows is another card. Spite Bellows and Mulldrifter both have something in common. They are both evoke creatures. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about those?
So what both these creatures do is that you can pay their evoke cost, which is less than their actual mana cost, and then when they come into play, sacrifice themselves, which doesn't sound like a advantage, but
yeah.
In the case of Spite Bellows, when it leaves play, then it shoots something for 6 damage, shoots a creature for 6 damage. So I think that the purpose of evoke is that these are kind of like pseudo spells. Like Mulldrifter, for example, is 4 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer that draws 2 cards and comes into play. Obviously, that is just insane. But if you pay 2 and a blue, it's just a divination. You just cast it and it dies, and it ends up providing the exact same effect as a divination with a few differences. It is worth noting that if you have something like Otherworldly Journey, which is exile a creature, bring it back end of turn with a +1/+1 counter, you can evoke Mulldrifter, and then in response to the trigger, the trigger would die. Otherworldly Journey it. You end up drawing 4 cards because it comes to play twice, and you end up with a 3/3 flyer, which is a pretty good deal.
Pretty good deal.
It's not the worst deal I've ever heard.
That is unbelievable. You just completely reload your hand and give yourself a sweet flyer. Yeah, I remember I had a deck back in the day that was in Pauper that did that with what's it called? Momentary Blink. Yeah. So, and you can do that with any of these evoke creatures if you do happen to have those combos. But basically what evoke does is it gives you flexibility. It lets you play a Spite Bellows for 3 mana to do 6 damage to a creature, or play a Mulldrifter for 3 mana to draw 2 cards. But if you find yourself a little bit later in the game and have the mana for it, your Spite Bellows comes down for 6, and it's a 6/1. And then when it leaves the battlefield, it's going to do 6 damage to something. So, these are really powerful. Another card that you'll see out of this is called Smoke Braider. And, this is one of the more powerful ramp type effects. It's just very narrow. It's 1 and a red for a 1/1 elemental shaman, and it taps to add 2 color in any combination of colors to your mana pool, but you can only spend it to cast elementals or activate the abilities of elementals. But we're talking about two mana creature that taps for 2 mana here. That means you could play it on turn 2, untap, and play Mulldrifter for full price on the next turn, which is pretty insane.
Yeah, so Smoke Braider, and then the next card, Incandescent Soulstoke, which is 2 and red for a 2/2, gives all your elementals +1/+1, and then you can pay 1 and a red and tap it and sneak attack in an elemental. You put it into play against haste and you sacrifice it end of turn.
Right.
Essentially like evoking your elemental.
Right.
Smoke Braider plus Soulstoke are kind of the cards that pay you for having a lot of elementals. And this is a term I'm going to use a lot probably in the podcast. When I say pay you, or X matters, it's cards that care about those cards. These guys pay you for having elementals because they get better. They give you an advantage for having elementals.
That's the payoff.
Yeah. And so I think that this is actually one of the less linear archetypes. And again, we want to rate all the archetypes on the scale of how linear they are. And what that means is how well do the cards in this archetype combine with cards that aren't in this archetype, and how much do they punish you if you don't get enough synergy. And I think Elementals is pretty light on that because most of the cards in the Elemental deck are just good cards. Spite Bellows,
right.
Mulldrifter, Shrewd Hatching, a card we're going to talk about in a sec. Just Electrolyze is just a red-blue spell. A bunch of other Elementals that, yes, they like having a lot of mana available, but they're just good cards by themselves. You'll play them often without, needing cards like Smoke Braider. But then you have cards like Smoke Braider and Soulstoke that if you happen to have a lot of Elementals, these cards are great, but you can draft the Elementals without a whole lot of fear, because if you don't pick up a Smoke Braider or a Soulstoke, then you still just have a fine deck.
And you have good creatures, yeah.
I think this is one of the safer decks to draft just because you're not taking much of a risk when you take an early... first of all, early Mulldrifter is just a great pick. That card's just going to be one of the best cards in the set. But you're not taking too much of a risk when you take a Shrewd Hatchling or a Spite Bellows early, because these cards are good. You don't need to make them work. They're just good cards. And they happen to have synergy with Smoke Braider and Soulstoke, but it's not so much that you need to really worry about getting the second part. what's riskier is taking a first pick Smoke Raider. I mean, I generally would not want to do that, just because if you don't end up in that deck, the card is basically worthless.
Right, it doesn't do anything. One thing to note about Incandescent Soulstoke as well is that it was downshifted on rarity. It used to be a rare, right? And now it's an uncommon.
Yeah, there are a couple cards like this.
Yeah.
There's a feature of Modern Masters 1 as well.
Yeah, so something to keep our eye on. Shrewd Hatchling was one that we mentioned, and this is a 4-mana elemental. It's 3 and a blue or 3 and a red. It's a red-blue hybrid. And it's a 6/6, which would probably send off alarms since you're paying 4 mana for a 6/6, but there's a reason for that. Enters a battlefield with 4 -1/-1 counters on it, so it comes in as a
great ability.
2/2. Yeah, that is not so great. You can pay a red or a blue to make target creature not be able to block it until end of turn. So you can, especially if you're just straight up in red-blue, you can just pay a mana basically to say that can't block, that can't block, that can't block, for each mana you spend. And then whenever you cast a blue or a red spell, you get to remove one of these counters from it. So the way it usually plays out is you play it, and if it survives, you get to untap, and then basically every spell you cast from there on out is going to remove a counter from it. And eventually it'll get all the way up to 6/6. But once it gets up to 4/4 or somewhere in that range, you can usually start rumbling with it, because you can start making certain things not be able to block, and it can provide a pretty quick clock. Another thing to note about it is that sometimes you cast like an Electrolyze, which is a card we mentioned earlier. That's the 1 red-blue, and it does 2 damage divided any way you want, and you get to draw a card, and that counts as a red and a blue card to start taking double counters off of the Hatchling.
Yeah, the reason for that is that the Hatchling has 2 separate lines that say whenever you cast a blue spell and whenever you cast a red spell, whereas if it said whenever you cast a blue or red spell.
That's right. A few other notables that I found, I wouldn't put them in the headliners category, but just things to keep your eye on. Inner Flame Igniter. This is a place to dump a bunch of mana. And, if you do happen to, basically I'll read it. It's 2 and a red for a 2/2 elemental warrior. And you can pay 2 and a red to have creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. And if it's the third time you activated it, they also get first strike. So if you find yourself with just a ton of mana floating around, basically 9, you can activate the thing 3 times and give all your creatures +3/+0 and first strike, which just means that your opponent's just going to have a nightmare entering combat with you in any way. Another one that I saw was a Horde of Notions. Maybe going a little deep here, but basically it costs Wooburg, so 1 of each color of mana for a 5/5 Vigilance, Trample, Haste. But I was thinking maybe you could Soulstoke it into play or something like that. Who knows?
I think for the most part, Horde of Notions just is not going to get played in the elemental deck. But
probably not.
If you have 3 Smoke Raiders,
look, you got to give people something to aim for here, Luis. You can't set the bar too low.
I am not telling people not to put Horde of Notion in their deck if they want to have a good time.
Yes.
The wins added with Horde of Notion is probably not a positive number.
It's in the minuses, yeah. The other thing that I did when Luis and I were setting this up was I made a list of the removal/answers, sort of the things that you need to keep your eye on for when you come in, because when we go through each of these archetypes, I didn't want to put too much removal in the headliners part, because that's just specific to the color. It's not really specific to the color pair or what the color pair is trying to do, but I didn't want to not mention it, because obviously some 2 color pairs have access to much better removal than others, and that does make them more desirable in most scenarios. So the ones I came up with for blue-red was Mana Leak, Narcolepsy. There's a repeal in there. I just put that in for you, basically, Luis. Counter spells.
I think repeal's a fine card.
I do too. Stoic Rebuttal. That was it's a cancel. It's 1 blue counter target spell. And if you've got Metalcraft, it just costs blue. Vapor Snag, Burst Lightning, Fiery Fall. That's one we'll see quite a bit. That's 5 and a red that does 5 damage to a creature, but you can also basic land cycle it for 1 and a red. Lightning Bolt. Hello. Tribal Flames. Which is
explain what Lightning Bolt did.
Yeah, I'm going to give my listeners enough credit for that one. Tribal Flames, which I don't know if you play it in just a straight 2-color deck. Maybe if you're desperate, but it's 1 and a red sorcery, and it says it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So for each type of land of basic you have, it does an extra damage. So here it would probably just be doing 2, and then Electrolyze, as we mentioned as well. So the removal suite seems not amazing amazing here. You've got some good cheap burn spells that are really nice, but you're kind of relying heavily on your blue counter spells to keep your opponent off of their bombs. And we're going to be talking about sealed in sort of the second part of the episode here for Modern Masters, since we figure a lot of people, well, they're going to be playing a GP or they're going to be playing a local event that's going to be sealed. And we're going to talk about draft maybe in a later episode. But yeah, and I don't know. I view this as one of the weaker removal / answers pools of the 10.
I think it's okay. I think Narcolepsy goes a long way because it gives this color pair an access to a way to kill 5/5s, which frequently it does lack.
That's true.
I do think a lot of the removal spells get better if you're actually attacking your opponent, though. I think making Mana Leak and Repeal and Vapor Snag into more, meaty removal spells is good if your opponent doesn't have enough time to recast their card off Vapor Snag or to play around Mana Leak. So
right.
It seems like if the game goes long, unless you're lucky enough to have the uncommons like Electrolyze and Lightning Bolt, you're probably falling a bit behind because your cards are not going to be quite as powerful as theirs.
Right. All right, let's move on to blue-white. This is Affinity. What does this deck do?
So this is actually a holdover from Modern Masters 1, which is kind of funny. They ran back. And it's using basically a bunch of cards that care about having artifacts in play, plus a bunch of artifacts, especially the colored ones, Glass Dusk Hulk in straight blue-white, and then Fairy Mechanist, which is trying to grab artifacts and is an artifact itself. So we've got the headliner, I think, is just going to be Cranial Plating. That's just going to be the biggest reason to do this. And
what does Cranial Plating do for people that haven't played with it yet?
Cranial Plating is 2 mana equipment, and you pay 1 to equip it. And it gives the equipped creature +1/+0 for each artifact you have. So the goal is to make Cranial Plating into a +5/+0, which maybe that's going to be a little tough, but +4/+0 or +3/+0 is not unrealistic. And it's also got black, move this or equip this to target creature. That is not an ability you're going to use all that often. It's funny that it's on the card, but this is the card they wanted, even though it's in the color pair that doesn't have black very often.
Right.
But you're trying to get, this deck's aggressive. It's just like Modern Masters 1, you're trying to get aggressive creatures on the board cheaply. You've got, cards like Mirror Enforcer that are in Sombra Hoverguard that are cheaper the more artifacts you control because they have affinity. It's, 5 in a blue for a 3/2 flyer or 7 colorless for a 4/4 that both can come on the board for 2 or 3 mana if you have a good enough deck. I noticed they did not have the capability of printing the artifact lands because those are not legal in Modern. But
right.
They do have Darksteel Citadel, so they have at least one of the artifact lands for you. And your payoff here, if you draft that a critical mass of artifacts, it's all about critical mass, is that you get to play Cumulox, the blue 6 for a 5/4 flyer that has affinity for artifacts. So
right, which reduces its cost by 1 for each artifact, so you can end up playing, you can play as little as blue for it, but you probably end up playing 4 or 5 mana for something like that if it's in the mid to late stages.
I would say in a good affinity deck you can play 3 to 4 mana for this, and even if you're paying 5 mana for it, 5 mana for a 5/4 flyer is still not a bad deal.
Not at all. You've also got some cards that we've seen from other sets that are now kind of merging in here, like Blinding Soul Eater, which was from New Phyrexia. It's 3 colorless for a 1/3 cleric, and you can pay a white Phyrexian mana, so you can either pay white mana or 2 life, and tap it to tap a creature. So if you need it to be, it's just a straight up tapper. Tap it, tap a creature. You do have to pay 2 life. And if you've got white mana floating around, you can use that to not have to pay the 2 life, which is, a pretty reasonable cost for that. And it's also an artifact. It's an artifact creature. So it's in the colors you want to be as far as the activated ability goes. It's fairly cheap. It's effective. And it also gives you that affinity that we were talking about, and Metalcraft, which is another thing that you'll see floating around here as well.
Yeah. And cards like that those are the more desirable cards because they're just good cards by themselves, and other people want it. Any white deck would gladly play Blinding Soul Eater, and even a red-black aggro deck will play this card. Phyrexian mana works that way. If you're aggressive enough, playing this as a pay 2 life tap target creature, that's still very good.
Right. So
you're going to be happy to play that card, which means that the affinity deck, which wants it also because it's an artifact, needs to take it higher. Whereas a card like Frogmite, 4 mana 2/2 affinity for artifacts, no one else wants that. In fact, not even every single affinity deck wants that. So
yeah.
You can be pretty safe in getting those later. Gust Skimmer, it's a 2 mana for a 2/1. 2 colorless mana, and you pay a blue to give it flying. It's just a mediocre card in most decks, even blue decks. But once you become Affinity deck, this card's kind of desirable.
Right. So. Yeah. Another card that stood out to me was Tumble Magnet. I remember that being really good in the set that it was in, which was Scars of Mirrodin. I don't know if it's going to hold up. It's 3 colorless for an artifact that enters a battlefield with 3 charge counters on it. You can tap it and remove a charge counter to tap an artifact or a creature. So it doesn't work forever, but you can really keep something locked down for a long time, and it adds to your artifact account once again for your Affinity and your Metalcraft. The card surprised me when it was first. I remember thinking it was just okay, and it ended up overperforming and being a pretty darn good card in the format that it was originally printed in. And it wouldn't shock me to see that happen here either.
It's funny. I actually think the card is bad in Scars.
Oh, really?
I think.
Oh man, I drafted it highly.
People tended to overrate it, but
I was one of them then because I was a fan.
Well, part of it depends on what kind of decks you draft, and in Scars, I tend to draft somewhat controlling decks, which definitely don't want Tumble Magnet.
Oh yeah, so no, that's real bad against those.
I think that is the differentiating factor. But yes, Tumble Magnet does a good job for this deck, also because when it's out, it still just sits there on the battlefield.
Yeah, it doesn't. You don't have to sacrifice it or anything like that. A few other things that I kept my eye on as well. Well, actually, before we get to that. How linear is this deck?
This is one of the most linear, if not the most linear, of all the archetypes. Because if you don't get enough cards, like say, look, Rusted Relic, it's 4 mana for an artifact, not a creature, but it has Metalcraft. If you have 3 or more artifacts, including it, so just 2 other artifacts, it's a 5/5 golem. So this is a 4 mana 5/5 in the right deck, or a 4 mana card with no text in the wrong deck. If you put this in a deck with no artifacts, just clearly just doesn't do anything. So your deck's full of cards like this, cards that are just hot garbage if you don't have enough artifacts. And so that is the definition of linear. Its cards need other cards to work, and they need them badly. And a lot of the cards are not cards that work well, in either direction. Like, yes, Rusted Relic gets turned on by cards like Blinding Soul Eater, which is just a fine card. But often you're playing Rusted Relic and just kind of bad, cheap artifacts. And you don't really want to draw either of those cards unless you draw both of them.
Right. That's the hard part. Another card that fits that description is Dispatch, which is white mana for an instant tap target creature. But if you've got Metalcraft, you exile it.
Yeah, the card Swords to Plowshares, it exiles a creature for 1 white mana in the Affinity deck, or it's just, absurdly bad in a non-Affinity deck. Right. So I think this is the archetype. I really like drafting this in Modern Masters 1. I don't know how good it is here yet. It's got, it's one notable card it's missing, a Sanctum Gargoyle.
Oh, that's huge. I was thinking that too.
Yeah, 3 and a white for a 2/3 flyer that when it comes into play returns artifact from your graveyard to your hand. That made the deck so much less risky to draft because you could just draft a couple Sanctum Gargoyles, and then even if you didn't get a ton of artifacts, the cards were pretty good value. Here, there's not a ton of good Affinity cards that are also good, safe early picks, like Blinding Soul Eater is one of them, but Cranial Plating, Cumulox, Mirror Enforcer, Somber Hoverguard, Rusting Relic. These are all very powerful cards that you want to make the deck work, but if you take them early, you definitely run the risk of them not being good enough.
That's right. Yeah, this seems like the type of archetype that you would like to see is open a little bit and then move in, rather than being the first one in and joining 2 other people, where now your deck's just going to be, all of them are going to be pretty bad.
I don't see a ton of easy ways to do that. You can take these cards, and Fairy Mechanist is one of them. It's 3 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer. When it comes into play, it's an artifact, even though it's blue. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, and if you find an artifact, you get to put it in your hand and put the rest on the bottom. Fairy Mechanist is not so bad, even if you don't have that high of a chance of hitting. Like, if I had, 6 other artifacts in my deck, it's not the worst card in the world. So that's not as bad as, say, Cranial Plating or Mirror Enforcer. But for the most part, if you want to get into this deck, you just have to make some picks that are potentially risky. So I don't think you end up in this deck from pick 1 all that often. What I think happens is that you end up taking some just decent blue or white cards, and again, Blinding Soul Eater is kind of important here. And then you get a 5th pick Fairy Mechanist, and then you get a 6th pick Mirror Enforcer, and then a 7th pick Frogmite or Somber Hoverguard, ideally Somber Hoverguard. And then you're like, all right, then you try to see if you can take some kind of bad trinkety artifacts, like the kind of cheap bad artifacts that hopefully no one else is taking, the Flayer Husks and Copper Carapace, these equipment that some other decks want, but not that many, and Gust Skimmers and whatnot. And these are cards that are kind of mediocre, but if at the end of pack 1 you have like 2 or 3 cards that care about artifacts and like 3 or 4 artifacts, then you can be pretty confident that the archetype is open and that it's worth going into. At which point you can then first pick Cumulox and be pretty happy about it, or Lodestone Mirror. This is a great rare. It's a 4 mana for a 2/2 trample. It's an artifact, and it says tap an untapped artifact you control. Lodestone Mirror gets +1/+1 until end of turn. First of all, it's a 3/3 blocker by itself because it can tap itself, which is kind of weird. Second of all, if you have 2 or 3 artifacts in play, this is a 4 mana 5/5 trample or 4/4 trample. That's pretty awesome. So this is one of the big payoffs for drafting this deck. And so you can, if you think you're going to be in this deck, opening this card is pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. A couple of other cards that stood out to me were, you mentioned one of the, you mentioned Flare Husk, and there's also Sickle Slicer. These are the living weapon equipment. So they function when originally cast as an artifact creature, basically increasing your artifact count on the table, but also giving you a creature with which to attack and block. And then they have some use later. Sickle Slicer, for example, is 3 colorless for an equipment, and it costs 4 to equip, which is quite expensive. The creature that it's attached to gets +2/+2, but it's got living weapon, so it comes onto the battlefield equipped to a 0/0 black germ token creature. So, like I'm saying, basically, if you can't get actual artifact creatures, then these will do a nice substitute job as well. As far as the removal and answers go for blue-white Affinity, they've got some decent stuff. There's Arrest. Right? 2 and a white, enchant creature. It can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. That's a really nice removal spell. Oblivion Ring, one of the better removal spells. Printed for limited, it just answers anything that you need to kill. That's of course the 3 mana enchantment that exiles another permanent.
And if you play it right, it can exile Magic Online.
It can. I've seen that. That was pretty great. Sunlance, which is that must be from what's it called, right? From
it's from Planar Chaos.
Planar Chaos, yeah, terrible.
Sorcery for 1 and a white, 1 white. It's exactly 1 mana to cast. Sorcery, deal 3 damage to target non-white creature.
Right.
So Sunlance is a great card. I've seen some people ask like, how many of these do you play? And the answer is just as many as you can get. Sometimes you have to side them out, but the card is just fantastically efficient, so you should take them.
Yeah, very, very good card. Also, the blue cards, Mana Leak, Narcolepsy was one that you highlighted. Repeal, Stoic Rebuttal, Vapor Snag, these type of cards as well. Okay, let's move on to our next one. Now, this one is kind of a combo one. I had this originally listed as 2 separate archetypes, but I think combining them makes sense because I almost did originally anyway. It's red-green ramp, and we'll call it Domain. 5 color, whatever you want to call it. It's basically just playing all the colors. So in its base form, Red Green acts as a ramp deck. It did in the original Modern Masters, though there was also a few Storm cards that you could use to kind of put a twist on it. But here it looks like it's pretty straightforward ramp deck. You've got some really big finishers like Palaka Worm. That's the 7 mana 7/7, and it's got trample, and when it dies, you gain 7 life and draw a card. Ulamog's Crusher. I don't know if we're going to be how often we're going to be able to cast this, but this is another big finisher. 8 colorless mana for an 8/8 Eldrazi that has to attack every turn and has Annihilator 2. Thing was great. The cards that kind of stood out to me, though, as the ones that are going to power this type of thing up are cards like Nest Invader and Kozilek's Predator. These are the ones that spit out Eldrazi spawn tokens when they enter the battlefield, and that's, a way that you can ramp up and sort of keep your board state intact. Nest Invader, for example, is 1 and a green for a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you get an 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token, and the token has sacrifice it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, which you can do or you can not. And Kozilek's Predator is kind of like the big version of that. It's a 3/3 for 4 that gives you 2 of those tokens. So, those are going to be kind of a lot of the ways that you power them out. I'm not seeing a ton of synergy here with just straight up red green, and I'm kind of focusing on that for a minute before we open it up to what else the deck can do. It's got some decent removal on the red side: Burst Lightning, Fiery Fall, Lightning Bolt. We mentioned Tribal Flames, but man, green green has decent removal these days in limited. We expect a few fight cards, in a block, just like we had 3 pretty decent ones in the last, in the Dragons, Cons, and Fate Reforged. Here, though, since these sets don't go back quite as that far, they hadn't really got around to making fight cards, and green just doesn't have any removal in this set. I think the only one I found is Plummet.
Yeah, green's pretty removal light, and overall, you're not playing it for anything basically but like rampant creatures, because that's what it has to offer, this particular set.
Right. So why don't we move on to the 5? I think that this deck is going to... So the note I put in here was, it doesn't seem like you're incentivized to just play red-green, because green has some really nice color fixing and ramp options. And so that it seems like you would basically always splash at least one other color just because it looks like it's pretty easy to do so. And a lot of times I think you're just going to end up being 5 colors. And there's a lot of different things to do that. So here's some of the headliners for the 5-color Sunburst Domain type deck. First off, there's Rampant Growth. So 1 and a green, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle at sorcery speed. So this is sort of the most basic one, but this gets you not only ramped on amount of mana, but also on colors.
Yeah, and I think that I was in favor of combining this, the 5-color and the red-green archetype, because they're basically the same thing. I think you're more likely going to be 3+ colors if you're red and green base than you are just straight red-green, because there's just no reason not to. Red-green has the 2 land cyclers. It's not a full cycle of land cyclers this time. There's Fiery Fall and Sylvan Bounty, but we're not seeing land cyclers in every color anymore.
Right.
Which was a feature of Modern Masters 1.
Other ways you can get more colors into your deck and or on the battlefield, bounce lands, right? I mean, you can just draft those bounce lands. Those open you up to other colors.
Bounce lands are awesome, and we've talked about them on the show before. I don't think you're going to get those very late, because I think people kind of have heard the word about bounce lands.
Yeah, from us.
Yes, partially. And if you end up seeing them, awesome. They're not really a reason to go into this deck. They do help Sunburst, though.
Yes.
So Sunburst is a mechanic that's on a couple or 2 of the more important cards for this archetype. Etched Oracle, which is 4 mana for a 0/0, and Skyreach Mantle, which is 5 mana for a 0/0, and that's about all they do.
Yeah, they just don't really pass the vanilla test very well at all.
What they say is that Sunburst says, for every different color of mana you paid while casting this spell, it comes into play with a +1/+1 counter on it. So Etched Oracle, it's actually kind of interesting in Sunburst that having a higher mana cost actually sometimes an advantage. So Etched Oracle costs 4, so it's max 4/4. But, sometimes if you played it with red, green, green, it'd just be a 2/2, for example.
Right.
And it has the ability of, you pay 1 and you remove 4 counters off of it to draw 3 cards. Target player draws 3 cards even. But, so if you can play that for 4, then you got a pretty big payoff. And Skyreach Mantle is just a flyer. It's Sunburst flyer. So if you pay 5 different colors of mana, then it's a 5/5 flyer. But even paying 3 different colors of mana, 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer is not bad. 4 different colors, it's a 4/4 flyer. Now we're talking. And if you're red-green, having like a blue-white bounce land is awesome, because it provides 2 extra colors of mana for your Sunburst cards.
Right, so that's huge. Now, the other payoff that you can get is with Domain, but it's actually not that big. It's just, I believe, only 2 cards are the only ones that I found, which is Tribal Flames and Matka Rioters. Tribal Flames we mentioned earlier. Matka Rioters cost 2 and a green, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of different basic lands that you control. So, that's fine, right? Like if you are playing the full 5-color deck, I guess your Matka Rioters will make the cut, but that isn't a huge pull. I think the Sunburst stuff is a little bit more important. I think the 2 cards that you just named are way better than the 2 that I did, for example. And I think that's going to be important.
One of my skills is naming good cards.
You also are good at naming bad ones. Also, hey,
I did successfully name it, I believe.
Wayfarer's Bauble. That's another card that you can use to get your mana going as well.
And that's one of the more valuable ones. It's an artifact for 1 mana. You pay 2, tap, sacrifice it, and you search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped. And the reason it's more valuable than, say, the next one, which is Sphere of the Suns, which is a 2-mana artifact that comes into play tapped, and you can tap it for any color 3 times. There's 3 counters.
Right.
Is that Wayfarer's Bauble helps your domain cards. You can go get your Swamp for Tribal Flames, whereas Sphere of the Suns does help fix your mana, but it doesn't actually help your domain.
That's right. And it's also runs out, right?
Well, it's also just a worse card.
Yes. But Rampant Growth and Wayfarer's Bauble are very similar cards, right? Just
the main difference is that other decks will take Wayfarer's Bauble.
Right.
It's funny that in the Affinity deck, you actually often play it and not crack it once you have enough lands.
Oh, interesting.
But that's a good, kind of like double-faced card or split card, rather. It's either a Rampant Growth when you need it or just Artifact Count when you need it. But most other decks won't mind playing Wayfarer's Bauble. If you don't have 1-drops, it's colorless Rampant Growth because it doesn't cost you anything to play it on turn 1. And, one of the subtexts of this set is that even though we're talking about these 2-color archetypes, they can often splash a third color. If you get an Evolving Wilds or a Bounce Land or a Wayfarer's Bauble, all of a sudden you're kind of on your way to having a close to a free splash. There's basically no such thing as an actual free splash, much like a free lunch, but often people do end up figuring out ways to splash things.
That's right. Yeah, you mentioned Evolving Wilds, another way to get more colors. Now, what are the payoffs, though? If we're going to, because even if we have ample mana fixing, we know that takes time. There's a tempo loss involved. Sometimes your draws don't cooperate. You end up with a bunch of spells that you can't actually cast, or you just don't hit your mana fixing at the time when you need it, and you get ran over. So you're taking on a significant cost here to play, the 4 or 5 color deck. What are the payoffs here? Why are we taking on that risk?
I think that the main payoffs for drafting cards like Rampant Growth and Wayfarer's Bauble is actually not necessarily among the 5 colors necessarily. I mean, earlier you mentioned a card like Palaka Worm, and that card is just amazing. That's one of my favorite cards from Rise of the Eldrazi, actually. I don't know if you mentioned what it did, but
yeah, it's 7/7 Trampler. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 7 life. When it dies, you draw a card. It does cost 4 GGG, though.
Yeah, but it's also just GG. I mean, the card
it is unreal. Yeah.
Yes, the card is amazing. I actually think gaining 7 on the front end and drawing a card on the back end is the way you would choose to have it, because often the problem with 7-drops is that you get a little behind when you're trying to set up casting them or just casting them in general. Mm-hmm. Palaka Worm buys you the time to enjoy the card that you eventually draw off it.
That's true. Yeah. I love that card.
So one of the best payoffs is Palaka Worm. Well, you don't need to be, 4 or 5 colors to play Palaka Worm. In fact, it's better if you're less colors in some ways. Or Ulamog's Crusher, the 8/8 for 8. It's colorless. You don't need to play other colors. But the thing is, if you have Rampant Growth, you have Wayfarer's Bauble in your deck, you might as well play other colors. It's kind of free to just, again, not completely free, kind of free to snap up an Oblivion Ring if you see one, or to, I guess Savage Twister is one of the better splash cards, but you're probably already those 2 colors. You could also even play something like Narcolepsy. Moldrifter is a card I'm not going to pass very much, even when I'm red-green. And once you have a couple, if you have 3 or 4 ways to get a third color or a fourth color of mana, then it becomes low cost. And one thing I do have to warn people about, though, is let's say you're playing red-green, but you want to splash like a Moldrifter and an Oblivion Ring and a sweet black card. Let's say, what's a sweet black card you could splash? You could splash like a Spread the Sickness or a Wrecking Ball.
Yeah,
Wrecking
there you
Ball's
go.
Pretty good. It's 2 red-black, destroy target creature, land instant. So let's say you want to splash 1 white card, 1 red card, 1 black card. Wayfarer's Bauble technically helps with all of them, but it only helps for the first one. So splashing all of those cards off like a Wayfarer's Bauble and a Rampant Growth could be stretching it, because yes, maybe you have with 1 of each basic land type, you have, quote, 3 of each source, but as soon as you draw your Rampant Growth or Wayfarer's Bauble or Evolving Wilds, if that's one of the ones you count, for example, then it's gone. Then you no longer have that source left. So you do have to be careful that you're not like double counting these too often, even though they do clearly count in some way.
That's right. One of the other big payoffs that you get is pretty straightforward. I mean, you just named a bunch of powerful spells, but you just get access to the bombs, right? I mean, some of them you don't, right? They have prohibitive mana costs.
You're not splashing your cryptic commands.
Yeah, your cryptic command isn't making the cut. There's also, quite a few instances here of cards that cost like Noblesse of War. It's like, you can either pay red, or white, or any combination of red or white, but all the mana is red or white, so you're probably not splashing those. But there's still tons of sweet bombs in this set that you get access to, and I think that that's part of the big payoff, especially if we're talking about sealed deck, which we're going to be talking about after. But if you're focusing on sealed, playing this 4 to 5 color deck and with all the Rampant Growths and all the mana fixing, that can be your big payoff. Is the bombs that you open in your pool, you actually get to play them, and that's that's a huge pull.
Yeah, it's in a set as powerful as this, that is definitely like a legitimate payoff, is that going into pack 3, you're pretty confident that you can play any single colored card easily, and sometimes you can even splash double colored cards. There's cards like Profane Command or Comet Storm that are just absurdly powerful. Like Profane Command is, well, it's going to take a little while because like every card we've had to explain in this set, there's like many lines of text. It's kind of one of the features. It's a sorcery for black X, and it says choose 2. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. Return target creature with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to play. Target player loses X life, or up to X target creatures gain fear. So it sounds like a lot. There's actually secretly in limited. There's basically 2 modes. I think probably like 90% of the time, and that's target creature gets -X/-X. Return a creature from a graveyard to play, and you cast that mode if you're kind of like behind on board, or the board's in neutral and your opponent's got a lot of life. Or there's X creatures gain fear, drain your opponent for X, and that's when you just deal 6 to them, make all your creatures unblockable.
And kill them, yeah.
Profane Command is one of the few cards I've ever rated a 5.0. You know, at my scale when I do card ratings is a 1 to 5. Except for no one here when it's a letter grade, but we would give it an A.
Yes.
So Profane Command is that good, and if I'm red-green going into pack 3 with like, you know, let's say an Evolving Wilds, a Rampant Growth, a Fairy Fall, and a Wayfarer's Bauble, I'm probably just going to take it. I think the card is that absurd. So I will stretch my mana and play 3 Swamps if I have to, and so I can play this Profane Command. And that's a huge advantage. If you're Blue-White Affinity, you just don't get to take Profane Command for so many reasons.
Yeah. So, yeah, for many reasons. So, yeah, so that's, you know, so there is a big payoff to that. And I think it is going to be worth it. And I think we're going to see this deck quite often. One question I did have before we move on to our next archetype was, there are a lot of artifacts in this set. If you are the full 5-color deck, is there any logic to saying, well, I'm going to play some of these artifact creatures that I know I get to cast at some, just by having lands at all, to kind of keep you around, you know, to give you something to do until you can get your mana set up? Or do you just go full on and every card you have is different colors and you just assume that you're going to be able to cast them?
I'm not super prioritizing that. I mean, we're talking about a 5-color deck, but honestly, I think a lot of the time, and this is from drafting Modern Masters 1 and also just drafting 5-color decks, maybe when it's ill-advised, you're going to end up with a base color where you have something like 10 sources of that color. And normally it's going to be green with like, if I had to guess, like your primary mana, it's going to be green with a decent amount of red with like smaller amounts of the other colors. You're able to cast your base color spells. You don't have to worry about that too much. And there's often enough green creatures to kind of hold out the ground until your powerful spells can come online. So I'm not going out of my way to take artifacts because they're artifacts, but yeah, I'll get to play the powerful ones. Yeah,
especially those Sunburst ones we mentioned. Next is Red-Black Bloodthirst. So who's angry? The headliners, I took 3 Bloodthirst creatures, Vampire Outcast, Gorehorn Minotaur, and Blood Ogre. So we'll start with Blood Ogre. And if anybody that played M12 will remember these, but Blood Ogre is 2 and a red for a 2/2, and it's got First Strike and Bloodthirst 1. So the Bloodthirst is always going to have a number after it, and that's how many +1/+1 counters it gets. And Bloodthirst basically cares about if the opponent was dealt damage this turn. So Bloodthirst 1 would say if an opponent was dealt damage this turn, the creature gets or enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. For Gorehorn Minotaur, it's basically the same card. It doesn't have First Strike, but it's a 2 red for a 3/3 with Bloodthirst 2. So if you've damaged the opponent, it's a 5/5 for 4 mana, which if you've played against that, it is super scary when they curve into that. When they hit you with their 3-drop or their 2-drop or whatever, and then they play Gorehorn Minotaurs and ship the turn back to you. It is very scary. And another one that's also from M12, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, these are all from M12.
They're all from M12, right? When was Bloodthirst first? That was in Ravnica, is that right?
It's in a Guild Pact, which is the second set in the Ravnica block.
Okay.
Interesting enough, it doesn't look like they have Guild Pact Bloodthirsters in this set.
Yeah, I just noticed that too. Anyway, Vampire Outcast, 2 black for a 2/2 with Bloodthirst 2, so it can be a 4/4 if you fit them, but it's also got lifelink, which, you know, a 4/4 lifelinker on turn 4 is a big deal. It changes the way the board plays out completely. Your opponent can't just attack into it. They have to respect it on the attack. It's big. It also changes the race. And speaking of the race, that is the name of the game with Bloodthirst decks in general. They have to really prioritize curving out. The one thing, though, that I like about the three that I chose as the headliners here is that they're all... Calling them good is probably a stretch, but they're all playable without Bloodthirst. Like, you can still at least resolve a spell and have it come down and not have it be like a 1/1 for 3 or something like that, where you're just like, okay, this is just complete misery. But if you look at them all, you're getting a Hill Giant, you're getting a 2/2 lifelink for 4, you're getting a 2/2 First Strike for 3. These are still below where you would want them to be, and they really, really, really encourage you to get Bloodthirst going. And if you do, your win percentage goes up a ton, and if you don't, you're casting some pretty mediocre stuff. And that's going to lead you down some interesting routes, because all of a sudden your mana curve is of utmost importance. We put a lot of emphasis on it on the show because it is important, but man, in a Bloodthirst deck, if you're not playing a creature on turn 2, you can start to find yourself casting these Bloodthirst guys without Bloodthirst active pretty quickly. There's a couple of cards that I noticed that can help you do that, and they're cards that you wouldn't necessarily play outside of a Bloodthirst deck, but there's one called Goblin Fireslinger, which is a card that I don't know. I don't think that you would normally play this guy. But it's red mana for a 1/1, and you can tap it to have it do 1 damage to a player.
Yeah, Goblin Fireslinger it's one of the funny cards. I mean, this is one of the Bloodthirst combo cards where it's not a very good card in a non-Bloodthirst deck. I'm just going to say it. You should not be playing this card if you're not trying to activate Bloodthirst.
Right.
But in the Bloodthirst deck, it's like the best card.
Right.
You have auto Bloodthirst. Your Bloodthirst is always on. And how you judge how good a Bloodthirst deck is especially in M12 was how many Goblin Fireslingers do you have? Because that's what means that the rest of your curve is active. Because often what will happen in a Bloodthirst deck is if you don't curve out, the first of your Bloodthirst crew is going to come down as the smaller version, which is not disaster in the case of Blood Ogre. That's part of the reason that Blood Ogre is so good, is that Blood Ogre is a 3-mana 2/2 First Strike, can actually brawl with most 3-drops, and, is not an embarrassing creature.
Right.
And then ideally makes it so your Gorehorn Minotaurs and your Vampire Outcasts and your, Duskwing Bats come into play. The bat is 1 and a black for a 1/1 Bloodthirst 1, so it's a...
With flying.
Yeah, with flying. It's a kind of cute little enabler that either is a 2/2 flyer for 2, which is very good, or it's a 1/1 flyer that can peck them in Bloodthirst. But if you don't have the Fireslinger and you have to play your Blood Ogre, you have to hope that it gets through. Otherwise, the rest of your curve gets, pretty unimpressive.
Yeah, that's right. Another card I picked out along those lines is Vampire Lacerator. That's a 2/2 for black. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life if your opponent unless an opponent has 10 or less life, which you don't really care about in this deck normally. It's just the fact that it's a 2/2 for 1 that can basically attack with impunity in the early stages to get in some damage. I mean, that certainly adds up quickly. A turn 1 Lacerator usually gets in for at least 4 damage, sometimes 6 before either being traded or dealt with. But it also, of course, is going to trigger your Bloodthirst as well pretty often. So you are going to need, if you're going to build this Bloodthirst deck, you're going to draft this thing, you are going to want to look for these enablers to go along with it. But yeah, when it comes to the actual ones, the Outcasts, the Gorehorn Minotaurs, and the Blood Ogre, I mean, those are all, if you get to cast those on curve as with Bloodthirst enabled, they are insane. It's just they're kind of like a lesson in the vanilla test. Cause it's you look at them, and especially in the case of the Blood Ogre, it's it just gets the 1/1/1 counter, but in combination with First Strike, it is just insane. The card just doesn't get blocked for 2 more turns after that. And even then it still is a force to be reckoned with. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of this strategy as well. I remember in M12, it was kind of the headliner and it was pretty sweet. Of course, the other thing you get is you get great removal. Your black and red removal suite is really insane. You get Bone Splinters, which is black mana for a sorcery. You sacrifice a creature and destroy a creature. You get Dismember, which is probably not going to make it to you because everybody else will be taking it. But you do get Dismember, which is 1 black, but the blacks are Phyrexian hybrid. So you could just pay 1 colorless and 4 life if you want. Instant speed, a creature gets -5 until end of turn. That's one of the best removal spells in the set, period. And you get some more mediocre stuff like Grim Affliction and Still Infection. These are cards that give +1/+1 counters and then draw you a card in one case, or proliferate to put another counter on it. Plus, if you have any other stuff going on, nameless and go ahead.
They additionally give -1/-1 counters.
Did I say plus? Did I say?
Which doesn't make them sound like combat.
Yeah, I meant -1/-1. Yeah, that's not. Wouldn't be in the removal and answers camp. Nameless Inversion's one that we had mentioned on the show before. It's 1 in a black for a tribal instant shapeshifter. It's got changeling, so that matters sometimes, but I don't think it matters much in the Bloodthirst deck. And a target creature gets +3/-3 and loses all creature types until end of turn. So, it'll kill most medium to small size creatures, or even can pump up one of your things to get in for the win. You've got Quag Sickness, which is, a way that you can, I really like Quag Sickness. It's 2 in a black, and it gives you, it gives a creature -X where X is the number of swamps you control. And it's an aura. So you're going to put it on your opponent's creature. And what you can do is you can put it on, and even if it doesn't kill it right away, it will usually take it out of functionality. It'll be like, it was a 5/5 and now it's a 2/2. And so you didn't actually kill it yet, but every time you play a swamp, it's going to shrink down further, so it'll die eventually anyway. And I kind of like the installment plan on that. Plus the -1/-1 for each swamp, that can get around certain things like indestructibility or some stuff like that sometimes you'd have to deal with normally. There's even more. There's Spread the Sickness. There's a lot of sickness going on here in this set, and that's 4 in a black for a sorcery, destroy a creature, and then proliferate. To proliferate, you can choose any number of permanents or players with counters on them, and then give them another counter of a kind that they already had on them. But basically, it says 4 in a black, destroy a creature. Like no matter what, which it's a sorcery. It's not, amazing, but when you need to get their bomb dead, it does that. And then the red removal spells that we talked about earlier, you get Burst Lightning, which is a flexible burn spell for the early or late game. Fiery Fall, which is again that 6 mana burn spell that does 5 to a creature. You get Lightning Bolt, Tribal Flames, and this one even gets Wrecking Ball, which is a card that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Luis, as a really nice removal spell. Destroy target creature at land for 2 black, red, and instant speed. So the removal suite here is definitely there. This deck looks to be the real deal for me. The question is just, outside of the 3 threats that we named, how good are the rest? And that's sort of yet to be seen. That's the kind of thing that you figure out when you actually draft the deck and when you start assembling pools and playing out games. But the tools are certainly here.
Yeah, and I think that don't make the mistake of thinking red-black has to be the Bloodthirst deck. Like, you just spent literally 25 minutes or something reading removal spells to me. So
sorry. This one does have the best suite of removal spells. Well, and I think that's one of the reasons to play this.
What I mean is that the color has a lot of removal. You can draft all that removal, and it doesn't matter a ton what your creatures are.
That's a good point.
So you don't need to be super focused on I have to be Bloodthirst. Often you will be black-red, and you will have Goblin Firesting in your sideboard, and you will not be a Bloodthirst deck.
Yeah.
Playing a Gorehorn Minotaurs and a Blood Ogre does not make you a Bloodthirst deck. Don't play your Goblin Firestinger in that deck.
Right.
Just play those 2 cards, use your removal to clear the way for your other creatures, then play those cards. And I think that red-black Bloodthirst is a deck you can draft, and if you have something like 4 or 5 decent Bloodthirst cards, then Goblin Firestinger does get good, and an aggressive curve in general. But for the most part, you can just draft these 2 colors and not lock yourself into anything. Gorehorn Minotaurs, Vampire Outcast, Blood Ogre are all cards that stand on their own. They're all just good cards. So don't consider this one of the more linear decks. It's the kind of deck that sometimes will want Fireslinger, more often we'll want Lacerator just because that's just a better card in an aggro deck that isn't bloodthirsting, and we'll just play the removal it gets. So it's not anything like the Affinity deck.
Now, this next one I think is much more linear than that. It's Black-White Spirits, and it's what I'm going to defer to you for because I know that one of, if not your favorite draft formats, had this type of archetype in it, and I've never drafted a Spirits deck before. So take it away. What does this deck do?
So Black-White Spirits is it hails from Kamigawa block, Champions of Kamigawa, and this was. Well, it was the first Pro Tour I did well at, which is probably why I have some amount of nostalgia for it. But also, I just really love drafting that format. I drafted it a ton. And the reason is that the Spirits deck, and it's more specifically Soul Shift, is just exactly what I want to be doing in a game of Magic. So what Soul Shift is it's on each creature with Soul Shift, it says Soul Shift in a number. And that number says it means that when this creature dies, you may return target spirit with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to your hand. And X in each case is the number on the card. So kind of the headliner of the Soul Shift deck is Scuttling Death in this set. That's 4 and a black for a 4/2. You can sacrifice Scuttling Death to give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn. And a Soul Shift 4. And so this pattern was repeated on most of the spirits, not every single one, where Scuttling Death costs 5 and it has Soul Shift 4, which means when it dies, you get to bring back from your graveyard to your hand a spirit that costs 4 or less. So the engine it kind of goes down the chain. Your 5 returns your 4, your 4 returns your 3, your 3 returns your 2, and in rare cases, your 2 returns your 1. So Soul Shift is basically turns all your creatures into cantrips. All your creatures draw you a card and they die, and the card they draw, if you've built your Soul Shift deck correctly, draws you another card.
That's kind of insane.
You can kind of see where I'm on board with this.
Yes, the slowest, grindiest card advantage engine I can think of.
Let me give you an example. It's not in this set because it would be drastically underpowered here, but of a card I enjoyed and actively sought out in Champions of Kamigawa block. That was Crawling Filth. The name was appropriate. 5 and a black for a 2/2 Fear Soul Shift 5.
It was a 2/2?
It was a 2/2.
You paid 6 mana for a 2/2 with Fear?
But you don't understand. When it died, it drew your Scuttling Death. And when that died, it drew your Strider. And then when that died, it drew your Thief of Hope. And then when that died, it drew your Economy of the Ancient Law.
Oh, that is absurd.
It was basically 6 mana for a 2/2 that when it dies, draws you 5 cards.
That's how you explained it? That's great.
Yes, essentially. So
now that one's not in this set. So do we have the ability to do this? Like, is there enough Soul Shift for us to kind of set up at least a mini version of what you're describing?
There is. Kind of the main Soul Shift chain is Scuttling Death, which again gets back a 4-drop, which gets Moonlit Strider, which is 3 and a white for a 1/4. It has Soul Shift 3, and you can sacrifice to give one of your creatures protection from a color of your choice until end of turn. And then that gets back Thief of Hope, which is 2 and a black for a 2/2. It says whenever you play a spirit or arcane spell, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So that's pretty good. That already pays you for having a bunch of spirits in your deck.
That's quite good, right?
Yes. Thief of Hope wasn't uncommon before. It's a common now. And it was one of the better cards you could draft in that format. More cards were spirits or arcane than in this format, but it's still a good card. And then Thief of Hope has Soul Shift 2, which gets back mainly Economy of the Ancient Law, 1 and a white for a 2/2 that sacks to destroy an enchantment. But basically the low drop spirits are very valuable, and they were before, because low drop spirits get hit by all the Soul Shift cards. You can draft your 2-drop spirit and know that if any Soul Shift creature dies, you get to get it back. Whereas sometimes you'll draw like a combination of spirits. Like Ghostly Changing is one of the cards in this deck that is pretty good because it's 2 and a black for a 2/2 that you can pay 1 and a black to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. And it's a changeling, which means it's a spirit, which means it's everything. So,
right. So you can get that back with these others. And Soul Shift is just as long as it's that number or below, it doesn't care where it fits on that scale, right?
Yes. So imagine drawing Thief of Hope plus Ghostly Changing. You don't get to actually Soul Shift there.
You don't get to.
No, because Thief of Hope gets a 2 cost and Ghostly gets a 3 cost. So imagine if you drew a 2-drop spirit, it gets back by all of your creatures. So that's why 2-drops are a little more valuable. But either way.
I see. Okay, so what I had assumed was that the Soul Shift was equal to its mana cost, and it's not always the case.
No, it is. It's 1 less.
It's always 1 less than its mana cost. I see. Okay.
In this set, yes, and in general, there were a couple exceptions. But the problem is, if you had a 4-drop with Soul Shift 4, you could technically return itself.
Oh, right, because it would already be there. Yeah. All right, that makes sense. That's cool.
So that was kind of that. So the Soul Shift chain is part of it. And the other part is cards that trigger when you play spirits or arcane spells. And there isn't like a heavy arcane, like splice into arcane theme in this set, but there are a couple arcane spells. There's like Otherworldly Journey, which I mentioned before, which exiles a creature and then comes back with a ++1 counter at end of turn. Which, by the way, you can actually do to your opponent's creatures. They get bigger, but you can remove a surprise blocker if you need to. Or you can surprise remove a blocker, rather. And then Nameless Inversion, which is going to be a very valuable card in general. It's insane in this deck. It's it's the card that you said gives a creature +3/-3, so a kill spell. But because it's a changeling, it's a spirit card.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Which means you can Soul Shift it back over and over.
Yeah, we were just talking about Thief of Hope. That can get that back, yeah.
Exactly. So Nameless Inversion to Thief of Hope seems like, you can't lose. And so you have cards like Thief of Hope. You also have that trigger whenever you play a Spirit or Arcane card. You also have Hikari Twilight Guardian. This is one of the powerful uncommons, which I think other people are going to steal.
Now, that used to be a rare, right?
It did. It's 3 white for a 4/4 flyer. So sounds pretty good. And then whenever you play a Spirit or Arcane spell, you may exile Hikari and then return it onto the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So you can use it to get vigilance, or you can use it to go ahead and blink out whenever your opponent has a removal spell. But again, Hikari is good enough that I think a lot of decks will take Hikari. And then there's Waxmane Baku, and this was one of your preview cards, actually.
That's right.
And Waxmane Baku was the best common in the set that it was in Betrayers, and it's 2 and a white for a 2/2. It has the trigger whenever you play a Spirit or Arcane spell, put a counter on this. By the way, I think they should have keyworded that and called it Spiritcraft, but that's neither here nor there.
We'll note that, yeah.
So, I'm just going to call it Spiritcraft, though. I think that's actually why I noted that. I remember now.
Okay.
So when I say Spiritcraft, I mean when you play a Spirit or Arcane spell. That's what those words mean. It's just Spiritcraft is easier than saying that over and over again. So it has Spiritcraft, put a counter on this, and then you can pay 1 and remove any number of counters to tap that many creatures.
So tough. That's actually, it's a tricky card to evaluate.
Yeah, it's a weird card, and even when the set came out, when Betrayers came out with tons of Spirit and Arcane spells, where the card's much better than it is here, it took people a while to kind of catch on. People were like, "How good is this card? I don't know. I'm going to take this other card that looks obviously better," and then it just wasn't, because Waxmane Baku. So what it does is, think of every time you cast a creature or a Spirit or Arcane card, you get to tap something, but it's even better than that because you get to save them up. It's not. You play this on turn 3, you play your Moonlit Strider on turn 4, tap their 2/2 and attack for 2. You get to put a counter on it, which means that you can save up and just tap their whole team in one turn. Ultimately, it's a lot more powerful.
So you can pay 1 mana to tap their whole team?
And it's actually like kind of templated kind of weird. So if it has 5 counters on it, you can pay 1 to remove up to 5. You can remove 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Which often means you're going to pay 1 to remove 5, tap 5 creatures. Sometimes it means you're going to pay 1 and tap 2 creatures. And then maybe they do something and you just pay another 1 and tap another 3 creatures.
Oh, that's crazy.
So it costs 1 to activate, but it's 1 per batch of activations, which is, again, kind of weird. Not a card they'd make right now, but Waxmane Baku is also awesome for this deck because no one else wants it, whereas Nameless Inversion is a card people are going to be fighting over. It's not unrealistic to get a 7th pick Waxmane Baku. It's just not a good card unless you're triggering it very often. So you can get Waxmanes. It also has synergy with Soul Shift because you're just casting more spirits. You're playing your Scuttle and Death, getting a counter. It then dies. You get back Moonlit Strider, play it, get a counter. Then Moonlit Strider dies, and you get back Calming Vinction Line. You get another counter. So
yeah, and I can see how that could add up pretty quickly and set up a big Alpha Strike or whatever.
It can, and the deck I think is going to be pretty grindy and controlling. Another really key card for the deck is Plague Rusalka.
What does that one do?
It's not even from Champions. This is from the Ravnica block. This is from Dissension, I believe. It's 1 black for a 1/1 spirit. You can pay a black and sacrifice a creature to give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn. And I think this is going to be one of the more underrated cards in this set, though. I may be changing that by telling people, which makes it hard to evaluate the data. So I'm basically hedging. So if no matter what, I'm right. Anyway.
Noted.
I like my caveats, but Plague Rusalka is awesome because first of all, it's a cheap spirit, which, as I mentioned before, means it comes back very easily. And second of all, it combos with just a lot of cards in the set. It combos with cards that put a bunch of tokens into play, like, say, Spectral Procession. It combos with wanting to sack a creature to get value, like sacking Thief of Hope to then get back Calming Vinction Line, which you can then sacrifice. And it's just efficient. It's I think, a very good card and a card that people are not going to look at and be very impressed by, but it's going to be better than it looks.
Yeah, so, man, it also makes combat kind of a pain.
It definitely does. You have a bunch of -1/-1s just sitting on the board. Also, the ultimate combo is Reassembling Skeleton, which is for a 1/1. And while it's in your graveyard, you can pay 1 and a black to put it onto the battlefield tapped. So with Plague Rusalka, it's 1 black target creature gets -1/-1, which doesn't sound insane, but imagine you block their 5/5 with Reassembling Skeleton, and you just you pay 4 mana to pick off one of their creatures because it's already in play. So you pay 1 to sack it to give a flyer -1/-1. You bring it back and you sack it to give their 2/2 flyer another -1/-1, and then it dies.
That's right, and you've gotten block value out of it too. Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, and I that's just another one of the little combos that kind of fit into this deck. So overall, I think Spirits is going to be pretty fun to draft just because I like this archetype, and I do like a lot of what's going on here. It's just grindy and gets a lot of value. It's got access to all the black removal you just named, as well as the white removal you mentioned earlier, like Oblivion Ring and Sunlance. Bone Splinters is also very good in this deck, whereas I think it's pretty mediocre in like the deck we were just talking about in Black-Red, unless you get specific cards that work with it. Whereas Bone Splinters in this deck, where you pay a black to sack a creature to kill anything, seems like a pretty good way to trigger Soul Shift to me.
Yeah, you're going to get that creature back, or you're going to trigger Soul Shift or whatever.
So this is not an aggro deck. It's certainly capable of aggressive starts, but it's trying to sit back, trigger Thief of Hope, get value off Plague Rusalka, get value off Soul Shift, and kind of grind the opponent out. And
and you mentioned... Go ahead.
I was going to say, hopefully that is... something that works well, because I'm certainly going to be trying it.
Yeah, I'm going to try it out too. I'm sold. This deck seems cool to me. And like you mentioned, the removal's quite strong here between these two colors. You can kill pretty much anything at any time. When I think of the removal suite that's available, I like to see cheaper removal that can keep off really aggressive starts from certain archetypes, but also I like to see removal that just outright kills creatures and doesn't care, how big they are. And white and black have both of those, which is, I think, a really strong selling point for a deck like this, too, because like you mentioned, this is one of the most linear archetypes that we have here. So what that means is you're going to be spending a lot of your early picks on cards like Nameless Inversion, Oblivion Ring, Dismember, Arrest, right? You're going to be taking these cards because those are the ones that everybody's going to fight you for. And then you're going to pick up the later Waxmane Bakus that nobody else wants if you're in the right colors. Somebody else might want it, but that's not getting thrown into a random deck. Plagued Rusalka is a card you can pick up late, like nobody else wants it. So, or you won't see it that it's not going to be going highly. So make sure that you're fighting the right fights in the early parts of a draft, if a draft is what you're doing. Let's move on to white-green tokens now. So this one is all about just spewing a bunch of tokens onto the battlefield and then trying to use cards that take advantage of that. A couple of the cards that we mentioned earlier are here again. Nest Invader and Kozilek's Predator. Again, these are the ones that make the Eldrazi spawn token. So Nest Invader gives you 2 creatures for 1 card. Kozilek's Predator gives you 3 creatures for 1 card. And that's quite a bit. Bestial Menace is another one that caught my eye at Uncommon. That one, of course, is... a pretty sweet one. It's 3 GG for a sorcery, and you get 3 creatures out of it. So for 5 mana, you get a 1/1 Snake, a 2/2 Wolf, and a 3/3 Elephant. It looks like, Elephant, the big one in the middle, and that's great. I mean, that's giving you 6 power and 6 toughness for 5 mana, which is pretty good. It's spread out over 3 creatures, which can let you use some of the payoff cards. One of them, which I don't think is a great card, but I think we will see it win some games, is Overwhelm. This was in M15 as well. It's 5 green for a sorcery with Convoke, and creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn.
Well, I think your anti-overrun bias is making you dislike the card more than you would otherwise.
It's possible, though. This is certainly not Overrun.
No, it is definitely not.
If it was Overrun, I would really dislike it.
Are you saying that only because it costs more and doesn't give trample?
Yeah, and also, like, the way you make it cheaper is by tapping the creatures that you were going to attack with.
Yeah. I do not think Overwhelm was actually a good design.
Yeah.
I think it is a bad design.
I think it's a fundamentally flawed card as well. Though I do expect to see it pick up a win or two in a deck like this, especially when we're talking about creatures like Eldrazi Spawn Token, which, they do get bigger, but like you can really make enough tokens here to make an Overwhelm fired off. Put your opponent in a position where with Overrun, one of the big things that always happened with it was that you could often survive it, but you wouldn't have a board state afterwards. And Overwhelm does that part still too. That it forces a lot of chump blocks. And even if you don't necessarily win that turn, you've basically won the game by clearing away all your opponent's creatures because they're forced to block. Another one that I know caught the eye of a lot of our Pauper fans out there was Scion of the Wilds, which is 1 green for a star, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. And, before this thing was a rare, right? Like when it came out, it was a rare, and it's been bumped slowly all the way down to common. It's at common now.
Which is pretty funny.
Which is kind of insane. I don't know if I've seen one that has gone the full distance there. I guess the full distance would be mythic to common, which I don't think is ever going to happen. But we did get rare to common here. We've seen cards similar to Scion of the Wild in white in some core sets and stuff. What do you make of this card? Is this one of the payoff cards for the archetype?
I think white-green tokens is a bit like black-red, where it's got this combination of cards that are just good and cards that you're happy to play, like Nest Invader and Kozilek's Predator and Bestial Menace and Celestia Guildmage, which is one you haven't talked about yet. That's two white-green hybrid mana for a 2/2. And you can pay 3 in a white to give all your creatures +1/+1, or 3 in a green to put a 1/1 token into play. These cards are all just awesome. You're going to play these cards if you're these colors. And, for the Guildmage, you could actually just be green X or white X. You don't even have to be both. And I think that because of this, you have a bunch of cards that are just awesome, and a couple cards like Overwhelm and Sign of the Wilds that you actually do need to work for. And sometimes they'll combine, because they obviously do combine well, and you'll end up in the more dedicated white-green tokens deck, and sometimes it'll just be like a white-green mid-range deck that has a Menace or a Sign of the Wild.
Right.
Or rather, a Menace or a Guildmage is what I meant.
Okay, yeah. And, with Scion of the Wild, there's some really nice curves that you can put together with this card that have you attacking for a heck of a lot of damage very early in the game. That's how you want to really leverage a card like this, because if you get quite late in the game, it gets a lot worse. It doesn't have any form of evasion, so it can just be blocked sort of indefinitely unless it's really, really, really big. And even then, you do end up taking risks, because remember, that power and toughness is going to fluctuate based on how many creatures you have at any given time. So if you attack with it, they kill a couple of your creatures before damage goes, and then they can set up blocks where they can just eat your Scion of the Wild. You have to be careful with how it works. But, we talked about Nest Invader a minute ago. You play a Nest Invader on turn 2. On turn 3, you play Scion of the Wild. And it's a 3/3 when you play it, which is already pretty decent. If you play any creature, just play a creature on turn 4, you're attacking with a 4/4 that next turn, and that's going to outclass basically anything that your opponent's going to do at that stage of the game, especially if you're on the play. And it's going to put a huge amount of pressure on your opponent. And if you just take that's a pretty tame example. If you take it one step further, things can get dumb with Scion of the Wild quite quickly. Nest Invader into Scion of the Wild into Kozilek's Predator. Right now you're attacking for 3, 4, 5, 6, and then hey, let's just throw Bestial Menace at the end of that curve, and you're crunching in there for massive amounts. So, while that's not going to happen that often, my first example is perfectly reasonable. Nest Invader into Scion into just a creature is going to happen some percentage of the time for you. And occasionally you'll get to just completely go off as well. It does mean that your Scion of the Wild is going to be the target of some removal usually, but so it goes, right? And I think that's a pretty cool payoff for this. Also, we haven't been talking about actual rares much here because, this is for limited review. We're trying to get you an idea of what the archetypes are doing, not about specific rares. But there is Overwhelming Stampede. We were just talking a minute ago about Overrun. And, this is a card at rare that you're going to want to pick up, and really is a huge payoff for this type of deck. It says, until end of turn, creatures you control get trample and +X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. It's a sorcery for 3 GG. And it is GG when you cast it for the most part. I mean, even if you just have a 2/2, you will often win you the game. But a 3/3 or above means that it's overrun, or better. And it'll often finish the game. But for me, I'm not really in love with these green-white token decks. I think they play a little bit too fair for my taste. Normally, I'd rather have some more interaction and do something a little bit more, direct. But if I open up an Overwhelming Stampede, then I'm much happier to be in one of these decks that can put out a bunch of bodies, go wide, and capitalize with an Overwhelming Stampede, or like we mentioned, the Scion of the Wild or whatever.
Yeah, I don't mind playing decks like this. I think it's kind of fun to play token decks sometimes, but I'm not going to be going in on Sign of the Wild or Overwhelm right away. I agree with you that that's not really where you want to be doing.
Right.
What I would rather, because it's a lot safer to go in the direction of tokens into Sign of the Wild than the other way around. Because if you draw a card like, Scatter the Seeds or Kozilek's Predator, then, you're in pretty good shape. Those cards are great. If you draw a card like Sign of the Wild, then, and nothing else to go with it, then you're kind of in trouble. So I would rather start with the tokens, and if I get a late Scion or a late Overwhelm, sure. I mean, most people are not going to want those cards. So I don't think you should draft this deck as if it were a linear combo deck. I think you should just draft the cards, and there's actually not a ton of white cards. If you look at the list that we've got, or that we mentioned, there are not a ton of white cards on it. If you just draft a bunch of green cards, and then you end up opening a Guild Mage or getting a third pick Guild Mage, by some stroke, then, maybe you go white-green tokens. Maybe you prioritize Sign of the Wild over something that, like something mid-range. But for the most part, I think that the white-green token deck is a bit of a misnomer in that it is a tokens deck. This clearly exists and is there. The cards are there. I don't think you need to go all in on it to kind of get the benefit. I think you should end up in this deck mostly if you get the engine or the payoff cards late and the engine cards early, because the engine cards in this case are the good ones.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, I mean, you just get the good, like you get Hikari and, there's just good white and green cards that you just get to play just straight up. Now, the last thing, of course, we have to mention here are the removal and answers. And I got to say, it's pretty dismal for this deck. Like the ones I have listed here.
Mainly because it's the two colors with the least removal in Magic?
Yeah, but like really light here. Arrest, Oblivion Ring, Sunlance, and Plummet.
Yeah, that's pretty thin.
I mean, that's bad. Like, and you're going to be fighting, so let's just take Plummet off the table because I don't think you're main decking it necessarily. And that leaves you Arrest, Oblivion Ring, and Sunlance, which are all premium removal spells, and any deck that can cast them is going to be fighting for those, including people that are splashing for the Oblivion Rings and the Arrests or whatever. Yeah, that to me is a big strike against this deck. It's going to keep me away from it in the early going until somebody shows me, no, you can still build this deck that can win even if you don't have access to that much removal. So we'll keep an eye on it. Next is Red-White Equipment. Also known as Double Strike. Yeah, go ahead.
I can tell you this is for sure my least favorite of the archetypes. I would not be surprised if I never draft it.
Shots fired. All right, so let's get into it. The headliners I picked out are a few Double Strike cards. I think that's clearly a sub theme here, even though they're not really, there's not a lot of synergy with Double Strike. You just try to make its power as big as you can get. But, there's cards like Boros Swiftblade, which is a 2-drop that has Double Strike, which isn't something you see that much. It's red-white for a 1/2 with Double Strike, which is just begging to have some equipment thrown on it or whatever, which I also took Darksteel Axe as one of the cards that looks to be pretty important for that. It's a colorless mana for an artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +2/+0. It costs 2 to equip, and it's indestructible as well. That seems to be a big deal in this deck. It's just one of the more cheap, efficient equipment spells around. There's Bloodshot Trainee. I don't know if this is the big payoff. It definitely...
It is one of them, yeah.
Yeah, so it's 4 mana. It's 3 and a red for a 2/3. But you can tap it to have it deal 4 damage to a creature, but you can only do it if its power is 4 or greater. So like the 2 cards I just named make for a pretty obvious combo of, you get the Darksteel Axe equipped up to the Bloodshot Trainee, and that thing can tap to just shoot down almost anything. I mean, anything but the biggest creatures. Now, the way that this got played out a lot in the set that it was in, which was Scars, is that even if you just pump it temporarily, right? You just, use a green spell or something to give it +2/+2 until end of turn. You could still tap it to kill something and turn that into a removal spell. If you can put a Darksteel Axe on it and have this thing actually just stick around, it's just a machine gun. It just runs down everything.
Yeah, it's a build your own Visara the Dreadful, and
yeah.
For those who didn't play during Onslaught, Visara is 3 black for a 5/5 flyer, and she's legendary, and she says tap, destroy target creature. And I only mention that because I call lots of things Visaras.
So we want to get that out of the way.
Yeah, Visara is just a very easy, and good to use term. It just means a creature that taps to kill another creature, or a creature that kills other creatures, is a more shorthand. And yeah, Bloodshot Trainee is definitely a Visara. If you can consistently get his power up to 4, he can shoot down just about everything.
Okay. Another payoff card is called Tajnar Swordsmith. It's 3 and a white for a 2/3 cat soldier. When it enters a battlefield, you can pay X colorless. If you do, search your library for an equipment card with converted mana cost X or less and put it into play, and then shuffle. So, for example, again, using the Darksteel Axe, if you can wait a turn on the Swordsmith and play it for 5, you can just tutor up your Darksteel Axe and put it right into play.
Yeah, and Tajnar Swordsmith is a little expensive. You don't really want too many of them, but it does make your deck more reliable, and there are a couple of good one-drop equipments.
Right. Also, Sunspear Shikari, which is 1 and a white for a 2/2. As long as it's equipped, though, it gets first strike and lifelink. So, once again, another card that pays you off for having the equipment. And then another one that I picked was... It's called Hearthfire Hobgoblin, and it costs 3 mana, either red, white, or any combination of those, and it's a 2/2 double strike. So another card that just wants to have equipment, and then you've got, quite a few different random equipment floating around. I picked the Darksteel Axe because I think it's the best of them, but there's other stuff, the Copper Carapace you mentioned earlier. There's the Sickle Slicer and the Flare Husk, the living weapon artifacts, equipment. So, there's quite a bit you can do there, but basically the idea here looks to be play creatures that either want to be equipped or have their power pumped or have double strike, and then just try to get in there a bunch. That seems to be what the plan is here.
Yeah, this is exactly what I want to be doing in Limited. This deck is a weird combination of combos. Well, it's cards like Bloodshot Trinity, Darksteel Axe, Fire Hobgoblin, plus Brute Force, which is 1 red to give a creature +3/+3 at instant speed. It's Giant Growth in red, another Planar Chaos or a color shifted card. And it does that while also kind of just being an aggressive deck. You're still trying to play 2-drop and a 3-drop to some degree. It's just you have these 2-card combos that can just kill your opponent kind of out of nowhere, or at the very least can just do a bunch of damage without your opponent really being able to stop it. Because the good ones, like for example, Skyhunter Skirmisher, it's a 1 white for a 1/1 flying double strike. I think this is one of the key cards for the deck, just because it's got natural built-in evasion. So I'd rather have the flying than I would a lot of the other abilities, because it has your base power and toughness don't matter a ton, because this deck is trying to give it +3/+0, +4/+0, or what have you, and this card can kill you pretty quickly. I mean, Darksteel Axe plus Skirmisher is 6 damage a turn in the air. That's pretty hard to stop.
I remain unimpressed. I'm kind of with you about this deck.
Yeah, I don't like the deck. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
The things it does that are good can look impressive.
Yes.
You might be unimpressed because you can kind of envision yourself playing a Skyhunter Skirmisher and not having a Darksteel Axe.
Yes.
Being kind of unhappy, or worse yet, a Bloodshot Trainee with no end in sight.
Yeah, or going to equip my Hearthfire Hobgoblin only to have it killed.
By Burst Lightning.
Yeah.
And you spent, a bunch of mana, and you prioritize cards that now don't work with the card that's in your graveyard. So, yes, there are risks with this deck. It's a little more all-in than I think either of us like, and it's kind of like a linear deck that I feel like doesn't have the payoff that I would like.
Yeah, that's how I see it too.
I said I wasn't going to rate the decks, but this is one that my initial read is that it doesn't look great to me.
Yeah, it's when it wins, it's going to look really good. Just because it's just going to be like, I can't block anything ever. It's going to kill very quickly. This is certainly a deck that can punish an opponent who's stumbling, who's maybe gone a little too close to the sun as far as how many colors they're playing and can't quite get their act together in time, or it's playing a lot of things that don't affect the board. This is the type of deck that can close out pretty quickly, and I certainly respect that. But yeah, I'm kind of, I don't see enough synergy here. Like, just pumping the power of a creature is not, to me, enough to really pay you off. So, as far as removals and answers go, I think we've established what the red and the white removal is pretty well. You get the burn spells, you get the Oblivion Ring, the Arrest, and the Sunlance out of white. It's decent. I think it's the type of removal that suits this type of deck well, where a lot of it's cheap, Burst Lightning, Lightning Bolt, to get stuff out of the way so that you can keep piling on the damage. And then even the catch-all answers like Arrest and Oblivion Ring don't cost a ton of mana at 3. Sunlance works well in this deck too, to clear away a blocker. So I like that. I think that the removal suite matches up really well with what the deck's trying to do. So that's a bonus that might help it out. All right, well, let's move on to the next one. I think that one's pretty straightforward ultimately. Black Green Sacrifice is what we called this one. I don't really know what to call this deck. There doesn't seem to be a ton of synergistic payoffs going here for me, unless maybe I just missed some of them. What do you see here, Luis?
So what this deck is nominally trying to do is play cards that make tokens, kind of like the green token cards that we saw earlier, plus Dread Drone, which is a 4 and a black for a 4/1 that makes 2 of the Eldrazi spawn. And then play cards like Bone Splinters and I guess more expensive cards. I don't think that this one is a super linear deck.
No.
I don't think that this is a deck that looks like it's that strongly supported either.
No.
I'm not seeing a ton as I look through the set of cards that really make me want to be in this archetype.
No, I didn't either.
Yeah, besides the fact that you can just get good black and green cards. The colors black and green can be open. Black has good removal. Green has good cards. And if you combine them, sometimes you will have, cards like Bone Splinters is one of the ones that gets a little better.
Again, you're second
one black sack a creature to kill any creature.
Yeah, spawn token or something.
Right. That card can be very respectable in this deck. It can actually just be 1 black kill a creature at very minimal cost. And if that happens, that's great. But for the most part, I think that you end up black-green not because there's a particular card that pulls you into this combination, but because you first picked like a nameless inversion, then you second picked, another black card, then you third picked Kozilek's Predator, and fourth picked like a Nest Invader, and then all of a sudden you've got some black and green cards, and you just keep taking playable black and green cards and end up with a deck composed of black and green cards.
Right. That does seem to be the case, though.
But, I mean,
it also might fall into that same kind of area that the red-green deck did, where you're base green and you have access to some decent mana fixing options there, and you just end up playing more than just black green. You're just like, oh, I'm also red, I'm splashing white, like I'm maybe even just kind of firmly into 3 to 4 colors or whatever, but with the base green with the black removal spells. I could see that happening pretty easily too. Again, there's just not a lot of cross card action going here, at least not on the surface. Maybe we'll find out a little more when we draft, but yeah, like I look through the spoiler and I'm just like, I can see just decent individual cards meshing the way that individual cards do, but nothing like what we were talking about with like Soul Shift and things like that, where the Affinity deck, where you're really trying to pile on a whole bunch of the similar cards to get a big effect. It just doesn't seem to be the case here.
Right, and that can be an advantage where if you think you're going into a deck like this and then you end up somewhere else, you probably didn't waste any picks.
Oh, yeah. Very
few of the cards are really dependent on other cards. But on the other hand, the best black-green deck is just going to be a deck with good black-green cards, which you're not going to get 5th pick Palaka Worms. That's just not going to happen very often. Whereas a Soul Shift deck can get a first pick quality card 7th pick because no one else wants Thief of Hope.
That's a good point.
That's one of the advantages of linear archetypes, which actually we didn't mention so far, is that they turn other cards into A+ that other decks still consider Cs. Whereas the non-linear decks, the decks that are just going on power level, they're not going to get 5th pick A's very often, just because
it's a good point.
People are going to take them. So.
Yeah, it's also interesting to mirror that though, because when you look at how the games actually play out themselves, right? You will see, okay, so you've got your Affinity deck going, right, and you're trying to get a Rusted Relic online, and your opponent kills your 2 of your other artifacts, and now your deck is completely on its back, right? Like your Rusted Relic's not a creature, you're getting beaten down, and even though your ceiling is quite a bit higher than a deck like maybe this black-green deck where it's just sort of playing out creatures, playing out removal spells, some powerful things in between, hopefully maybe a bomb in there or whatever, each card kind of stands on its own. It might not stand quite as tall as like a Rusted Relic does when it's active as a 4 mana 5/5 that gets to just rumble, but if the plan doesn't come together for the linear archetype, then, it often falls quite flat, where here, the deck is going to be a little more in the middle, where when the plan comes together, it's probably not going to be as good as that other deck. But if it does get disrupted, it's just killing individual threats and not really taking the whole deck off of its plan.
Right. If you think about what the different draws you can get, and we're going to go back to the 1 to 10 scale here, a solid, Affinity deck does have more 1s and 2s and 3s than your average, like, black-green deck with decent power level, but it also has more 8s, 9s, and 10s.
That's right.
Just because sometimes you get, you dump your hand of 2 Mirror Forces on turn 4 and your deck just looks awesome.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't cast anything.
Right.
Whereas the black-green deck, if it draws lands and spells, most of its draws are going to be, between like a 4 and a 7, just because that's like where a lot of draws tend to cluster. It might not even have a 10 draw in its entire deck.
That's right. That's easily possible.
So that's another advantage of the linear decks. Of course, and we still, I think, owe the podcast a good explanation as to our variance discussion from last week, because I think there's a lot more there.
I'd like to talk about that. Yeah, not here, but I would like to talk about that.
Right. So, but of course, each deck has like an overall adjusted win percentage, and you have to figure out what exactly that is. And it doesn't matter too much about the whether you get more 10s versus 7s, but it does matter that the Affinity deck has a higher capability, assuming it's consistently enough. And you're taking more of a risk when you do that. Whereas the black-green deck, I mean, this is a high-powered format. There's some decks that like a medium black-green deck just doesn't really have a great shot against, whereas the Affinity deck has a better shot.
Right. Removal suite.
That discussion again. I already regret
it. You can't go back, but I will pull you away from it. The removal,
if
of
you're
course.
Hearing this, we didn't edit that part.
Yeah, I'm not editing it. You're stuck with it.
Imagine though that Marshall did edit out a great explanation that fully answers all your questions.
That's so raw. Maybe I will just edit it now. So the removal suite, I can just do the whole thing. The black, of course, is where all the removal comes from for this black-green deck. Again, we've noted that green just has no removal in the set. So you're going to have to lean on that pretty hard, probably have to prioritize it. Next, a couple more here before we move on to talking a little bit more generally about sealed, and then we'll be wrapping up this episode. Blue-green Graft. And this is... This archetype looks like it has some cool potential, though I don't know if critical mass is available in the set to really make it fly. What do you see happening here with blue-green Graft?
So the main kind of like theme is, well, graft, and we don't mean like corruption. We mean the ability from dissension, which is you have these creatures that come to play as 0/0 with some amount of +1/+1 counters on them. And then they have the ability, which is, again, templated very oddly, which says whenever another creature comes into play, you can move a +1/+1 counter onto it. It annoyingly triggers on your opponent's creatures, but if you're not playing on Magic Online, that won't really come up. You're not... In this set, there's not very many, if any, reasons to put counters on your opponent's creatures. So, one basic example is Aquastrand Spider. It's 1 and a green for a 0/0 that has 2 counters on it. So it's a 2/2. It's 2 mana for a 2/2. Pretty good. And then you can also pay a green to make target creature with +1/+1 counters on it able to block flyers this turn, give them reach. So... the combo with a lot of these graft creatures is, I mean, there were some very basic ones when the set first came out, but the combo with all these graft creatures is they come into play with +1/+1 counters. When you play another creature, you can start moving the counters over, and then they also give a bonus to creatures that have counters. Like Helium Squirter is a 5 mana, 3/3 essentially, has 3 counters. And when you graft onto a creature, you can then pay 1 to give it flying. And these kind of work in every direction where it doesn't matter where you got the +1/+1 counters from, you're able to just activate on those creatures. So if you played an Aquastrand Spider, then a creature, then later a Helium Squirter, it works with that prior creature.
Right, and you can just start giving, because it only cares that the creature has a +1/+1 counter on it, right? So all your grafts sort of come with that automatically, and any other ways you can get counters on, and all of a sudden your Helium Squirter is just sending everybody to the sky.
Right, and the synergies here are, first of all, there's Proliferate, which we mentioned earlier, lets you put basically every creature that has a counter gets another one.
That's right. Yeah, the one that stood out, I think the main one is Steady Progress. That's 2 and a blue for an instant that just says Proliferate, draw a card.
Well, that's one of the kind of low cost ones because it does cycle.
Yeah, it's just.
I think the engine card, the one you really want to watch out for, is Thrumming Bird. That's
Thrumming Bird. I missed that.
Well, I mean, you didn't miss much, just the most important card. But I say as Marshall put all these cards down. I put more in the sealed format, in the sealed portion, but he did make a lot of these show notes.
Yeah, I just whiffed on Thrumming Bird. That was my bad.
It's 1 and a blue for a 1/1 flyer, and when it deals damage to the opponent, you can proliferate.
Yeah, so that one's one that you can repeat proliferate pretty often, and looks like it's also been bumped down to common.
Yeah, so the awesome part here is playing turn 2 Thrumming Bird. Turn 3 you just play a graft creature attack and your graft creature just gets +1/+1. Then next turn you play another creature, move a counter over, hopefully hit with Thrumming Bird again, and now Thrumming Bird makes 2 +1/+1 counters, so it gets out of control pretty quickly.
Oh, totally. That's great. I think that's really, really sweet. And then I mentioned Steady Progress. Also, if you're looking to really go off, there is Inexorable Tide, which
I don't think it's actually good.
I don't either.
My experience with the card when it was first printed in a set that actually has more synergies than this one was that the card wasn't good. So I can see people trying it, but I'm probably not going.
Well, now hold on a minute. You say the other set had more synergies, which was true in a broader sense, but what it didn't have as much of like mostly those were -1/-1 counters flying around. This is different. So Inexorable Tide is 3 blue enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, proliferate. So I could see this though, being like you play, let's say 2 Graft creatures and then an Inexorable Tide at some point, that curve is pretty natural. And then every spell you cast after that is going to pump up your Graft creatures for the rest of the game. It doesn't matter what the spell is. It's just casting a spell, within the set that Inexorable Tide is from, which was Scars. You kind of had to have, certain things going as far as like shrinking your opponent's creatures down was kind of the main way to do it. And this one just all it cares is that you have a bunch of Graft creatures in play. I think it's a little better here, actually.
Actually, you're right. -1/-1 counters kind of have a cap on how good they are. Once the creature's dead, you don't really care about it anymore. Whereas +1/+1 counters, the sky's the limit. So I could see it being better than my initial reaction of it's unplayable. I don't think that it's the card you want to really.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Thrumming Bird is more the engine you should be building.
I mean, look, you're still paying 5 mana for a card that doesn't do anything. Right? Like, it might set you up down the line, the Tide, but like, I have a pretty rough time thinking that it's going to be worth it to just like take entire a card and a turn off just for the potential of getting more counters on only your creatures that have +1/+1 counters. Like, that is the setup cost for Inexorable Tide, even if it is a little better than before, is still probably prohibitively high.
Right. But
Thrumming Bird's sweet though.
The engine cards besides Thrumming Bird are still pretty strong here. You have Plaxcaster Frogling, which, overlook the ridiculous name, and it's 1 blue-green for a 3/3. Because it has Graft, so it's got 3 +1/+1 counters, and you can pay 2 and make a creature with a +1/+1 counter have Shroud. So it is able to protect your other creatures. It will give it enough mana, which is a pretty big deal. And it's a 3-mana 3/3. Just a 3-mana 3/3 is already that has good abilities. I mean, that's not a bad card in any deck. It's also noteworthy that it's actually Shroud, not hexproof.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our newer listeners will not be used to Shroud.
Which is, it can't be targeted as spells or abilities by anyone. So this comes up in 2 ways. One, when you're giving your own creatures Shroud, you will no longer be able to target them later in the turn. 2, sometimes you're not going to move counters onto their creatures very often, but sometimes you'll play in a matchup where they just have counters, and Plaxcaster can sometimes give their creatures Shroud if they're trying to do something good to their creatures.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's a kind of weird little on the board.
That is weird. Yeah,
that, you should keep in mind.
Another one that can pick up counters fairly quickly is Lore Scale Coatl, which is 1 blue-green for a 2/2. Whenever you draw a card, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it. This thing, it's a little slow, but it can just sit there and grow and grow and grow. And if you are doing a whole bunch of +1/+1 counter proliferate shenanigans, I could see playing this thing too.
Yeah, I think that the card is already playable by itself if you can cast it easily.
You think so? Yeah, I think it's like right in that middle range. It ends up being probably good enough, huh?
It's a 3-mana 2/2, but on your turn it attacks as a 3/3, and then every turn after it just gets bigger. And also, if you have random cantrips, it still just gets bigger. So, playing this than casting a Muldrifter, if you're lucky enough to have a Muldrifter, you've got like a 6/6 out already.
Yeah, which is great.
The main thing with the Lore Scale Coatl is it's a gold card, and you're going to have to be blue and green before you really want to play it.
So, removal and answers.
Pretty low.
A little light.
It's got the Mana Leak, Narcolepsy, Stoic Rebuttal, Vapor Snag kind of sequence that we've mentioned before, but none of those are permanent answers, really. I mean, no. Narcolepsy is close, but your opponent can get out of it with a bounce or an enchantment removal spell. You got some counter spells, one of which is even conditional. These are more... this deck is definitely more focused on the power of its creatures than the power of its spells.
Yeah, I'm excited because I think this deck looks really cool. But if I had to guess, I would say this is not going to be one of the headliner archetypes. It feels like there's some cool synergies and that you can kind of go off, but when you basically take removal off the table, which we've essentially done here, It just means that you don't get as much time to set up these cool interactions where you're starting to proliferate. You got a whole bunch of +1/+1 counter creatures going. And I don't think that it's fast enough as a deck. Like, let's say you have a nice curve out where you really are taking advantage of this stuff. It's pretty good. I mean, you know, like the Plaxcaster Frogling, that's a 3/3 for 3. Like that's ahead of the curve anyway. You're probably going to get in for a good amount of damage with that. Your Helium Squirter can send some things to the air later in the game. You're going to have something going on, but it doesn't strike me as one of those decks that has like an immediate punch to it. And if you don't have an immediate punch and you don't have removal, I'm worried. Like that's makes me think that you're going to be setting up your cool shenanigans while your opponent picks off your creatures or is beating you down or whatever. And that makes me think that this one's probably not going to be one of the headliners.
I agree.
Sadly.
I think that the most common way you end up in this deck is that you just get like some powerful gold cards like Plaxcaster Frogling or the Lore Scale after taking maybe like a couple cards of one of the colors. Like you've taken 3 blue cards, then you see a 4th pick Plaxcaster Frogling, you're like, all right, I guess that, you know, there's a pretty good sign that this particular color combination is open, and then we'll see, you know, what goes from there.
How high are you taking Thrumming Bird for this thing? It seems like one of the most important cards for it, huh?
Yeah, Thrumming Bird's interesting. It's the card that really makes this deck tick. It's also just a powerful card because it just offers a repeatable, powerful effect for only 2 mana. I don't know yet. It's tough because my guess is that people will draft it more highly than I will. And, you know, when your internal pick order is lower than the format other people's, then you don't see the card very often. Like, I don't think I want to first pick Thrumming Bird, but if other people are, I'm just not going to see very many. So I think that people are going to probably be a little bit too happy to take this card and try to get this deck to work than I will, which will mean that I won't get to play it as often, but it does seem cool and it is certainly powerful.
Okay. Our last color pair is blue-black. And this one, you know,
that's for last as usual.
Yeah. I mean, this is right up your alley and my alley, as it turns out. It doesn't seem to have any obvious synergies. Nothing is really jumping out as like an overarching theme for this archetype outside of great answers, threats, and 2-for-1 potential. I don't really know what else I want than that. Cards that stood out to me, I mean, there's a lot of them, but Muldrifter is one of the headliners for sure. Unbelievable card. You know, you mentioned earlier that casting it for 5 mana and getting the 2/2 and the 2 cards. I mean, that's a 3-for-1. Like you just don't get that in limited very often at all. And this is just the easiest 3-for-1 you can get. Agony Warp. That's a removal spell. I'd normally have it down in the removal answers category, but you know, I think it is one of the cards that you're going to be looking for to kind of move you along this line. It's blue-black for an instant. Target creature gets -3/-0, and another, or I shouldn't even say that. And target creature gets -0/-3. You can split them up or put them on the same creature if you want, and you can get a 2-for-1 pretty easily out of that if you've got any type of reasonable board state. Air Servant, you know, maybe not the flashiest card, but Air Servant at uncommon is 4 and a blue for a 4/3 flying, and you can pay 2 and a blue to tap a creature that has flying. The thing just clears the skies and beats down. It kind of needs to be killed relatively quickly, or else it just finishes off your opponent, and that's great. I put Dimir Guildmage on here, but I have to admit I've never played it in a limited setting before. Is it good?
Dimir Guildmage?
Yeah.
Dimir Guildmage is awesome.
Okay, cool. I had the hunch that it was, but it is 4 mana to activate either one, and that's pretty pricey, so I wasn't 100% on it.
That's true, but it's, again, it's 2 mana and 2 easy mana to cast. If you're blue-black, you can always cast it on 2 lands unless you have random Darksteel Citadels in your deck. So you can always cast it, and which, you know, as a 2 mana 2/2, it's just going to get on the board and be decent. And, you know, paying 4 to draw a card or 4 to make them discard a card is very strong. It's the sort of thing that you shouldn't use recklessly, because sometimes you do have to actually cast spells to not die, or at least I've been told that. But you know, you can get your opponent down to like, you know, a few cards in hand, then all of a sudden the discard's a real threat, and if the game ever stalls, you just win the game off the card draw.
Right.
There's also a trick that's probably not going to come up here, but it came up in the milling set, which was where Dimir Guildmage first appeared in Ravnica. Mill was a theme in blue-black. where when they have no cards in their hand, you can make them discard a card, or make them draw a card, then make them discard a card.
Oh, if you had enough mana?
Yeah, it's like slow, bad mill, but sometimes it happens.
That's kind of crazy. Other cards or other things to consider, you're going to get access to the counter spells, the removal, and the card draw, which is kind of, the holy trinity for value-oriented players like Luis and I. You're going to get access to all the black removal. The blue is, it's lesser, right? We're talking about cards like the counter spells and things like that. But you get access to narcolepsy, and the counters. And then of course the black removal suite is actually quite deep. It goes, pretty wide here too. And you're going to get that as well. And then there's some decent, rares and bombs and stuff that you're going to have access to as well. Again, I'd put this quite low as far as the synergistic thing goes for this archetype. There's not a whole lot that I've seen, but I don't really care. It's got cards that I want to play and a strategy that I like, so I'm going to be playing it a lot.
Right. It's again, like, about as non-linear as it gets, just because all of its cards are just great. It has a minor proliferate theme, with -1/+1 counters and all that, like you said, but it's really just a value deck, and that seems like a fine place to be. It's also, I think, going to splash somewhat often. If you have, any amount of decent card draw, picking up an Evolving Wilds or a Bauble to splash like a Burst Lightning or something does not seem unreasonable.
Right. Okay, so that's going to do it for the color pairs. Hopefully that gave you a good idea for the topography of what you're going to be facing when you sit down to draft or even build your sealed deck. We wanted to give you enough depth there so that you had an idea for what each pair was doing and some of the cards to look out for without feeling like we needed to go over every single card. And I think this is a good way to do it. But that's going to bring us to the other part of our primer here. We're going to be talking sealed. Luis and I had noticed that people were asking for more sealed content. And while we don't want to go overboard with it, because we do figure that most of our listeners are primarily interested in drafting, sealed is a big deal. It's how you qualify for tournaments. It's how you win a lot of bigger tournaments, GPs, day one. You're not making it to the draft if you don't know how to build a sealed deck. And so we're going to take some time here to talk about sealed for Modern Masters 2015. Where should we start, Luis?
I think that we should start with kind of like the process. At least the process I go through. You can weigh in if it's a little different for you. The first thing I look at is, my rares. I mean, I am only human. And the rares are less important here than they have been in most sets. It's not that there isn't good rares in this format. There are. But there's also just a higher power level in general, so you're less dependent on your rares for having a good deck.
Okay.
And you're way more likely to leave good rares in your sideboard if the mana fixing doesn't line up.
Right. I do the same, like when I'm laying out my pool, I usually lay it out by color, but I mean, yeah, I'm always curious. I want to look at, see which rares I got too, because that is a big deal. I mean, it is going to dictate a lot of what happens, for the power ceiling on your deck. So I do that too.
I was under the impression that you hid your rares, but maybe that was...
Well, no. Do I have to go over this again? You keep getting... I still stand by that as being a reasonable thing to do for a newer player. Luis is, of course, referring to when I was talking on the show once about not looking at your rares immediately before sorting So set your rares aside and then sort your pool by color. And the thinking being that it's easy if you're a new player to get caught up in what rares you have and misbuild your pool just because you want to try to play your rares. Now, that opened up another interesting discussion about maybe that's actually correct these days, because there are some sets where the rares are so much better than the rest that you actually do want to do that. But I think traditionally that isn't the case. And it can sometimes be misleading where you get big eyes about it. You're like, oh, I got a sweet rare, I'm going to play it no matter what, even if your pool really wanted you to play two other colors. For more experienced players, I don't think that's necessary. It's more of a thing of when you're still learning how to assess a pool, to make sure that you put the proper weight on how your colors are distributed, how deep each of your colors goes, and let that be more of a guiding force for a better deck overall than just, well, I opened a sweet rare and I'm going to play it. Here, I don't really know what that delta looks like between the rares and the rest of the cards. We're going to have to kind of figure it out. I feel like these rares are pretty insane though. But I also feel like we've been given a lot of tools with which to cast them, even if we're not in green, and we might be playing them pretty often, even in decks that you wouldn't normally consider splashing or easily splashing.
I think the delta is smaller in this format. I mean, there are some rares, like I mentioned, Profane Command. Another one is Comet Storm. It's a red X, deal X damage to target creature or player, and it has multi-kicker X, where you can basically, or one rather, you can pay one more to just basically copy it onto another target to have it. So you can pay red 4 to deal 4, and then you can pay 3 more mana to do 3 more targets. So for something like 9 mana, you get to deal a 16 damage total. I mean, the card is just absurd. It's at the
16. Holy crap!
Yeah, because it's 4/4/4/4, or rather, 4/4/4/4. It's because it does red 4 to deal 4 damage to the original target.
Right.
And you paid 3 more mana to do it to 3 more targets.
That's absurd.
Comet Storm is just one of the best cards in Limited Magic has ever seen. So yes, there are those cards, but there's also cards like Muldrifter and Oblivion Ring and Dismember, which are just great cards and can give you a lot of value and can deal with things. So I don't think you're as married to your rares. So anyway, after you look at your rares, or in Marshall's case, hide them,
What rares?
I look at the mana fixing. Bounce lands are the most important. You really want to play your bounce lands, all of them. I would play... You're not going to get enough sealed in your sealed deck that you're not going to play them all because they're uncommon.
Do you get a sense for how many you've been getting? I know you've been opening up a fair amount of those kind of fake. 0 to 2 is the norm? Okay.
That's been my impression so far.
But you're going to play them?
I mean, I'm going to try to build my deck so I can play them.
Okay.
My goal is not to play a white-green bounce land in a black-blue deck. It's if I get a white-green bounce land to see what color, if I can build a deck that's touching green or white.
Gotcha.
And you're not going to get 6, so don't worry about that corner case. I guess at most you could play like 4 or 5, and it's still pretty good.
Okay.
But I look at your bounce lands. I look at your Wayfarer's Baubles and Evolving Wilds just to try to get a sense of can you easily play 3 or 4 or 5 colors? Sphere of the Suns I like a lot less than those other two, but it's still a card. Then you just sort it by color with the exciting cards on top. And these are the cards that don't have to be literally rare, but cards like Muldrifter, Spectral Procession, Palaka Worm, Bestial Menace. Necrogenesis is very good.
I like that card.
Enchantment for a black and a green, and then you can pay 2 to exile a creature in a graveyard to put a 1/1 token into play. Demure Guildmage and Celestia Guildmage are both quite good. Savage Twister's awesome. Red-green X deal X to each creature. I mean, that card's just good. Vengeful Rebirth is also a very powerful card. It's a regrowth that deals damage equal to the converted mana cost of the card you got back from your graveyard. So, 4 red-green, return a card from your graveyard, deal 4 or 5 damage is awesome. Then you look at the removal, like Burst Lightning, Arrest, Narcolepsy, Nameless Inversion, Spread the Sickness, Dismember, Lightning Bolt. These are the cards that, we've talked about the whole show and for a reason. So once you kind of get a sense of which colors have which of these things, often you're just going to play 2 main colors and 1 to 3 other colors. I'm talking, most of my decks have been 3+ colors. So
I've noticed that too, by the way.
That's a departure from a normal sealed format.
Yeah, for sure, where you're often incentivized just to play 2 colors and kind of force yourself not to be greedy. It feels like this one's actually pushing us a little in the other direction.
Right. It's not like cons where you have actual 3-color incentives, really. It's more like you open a pool with a lot of good blue and black cards, but you have a red-blue bounce land and an Evolving Wilds and a Wayfarer's Bauble, and you have a Lightning Bolt and a Burst Lightning. It's kind of just put those pieces together.
Right.
Or alternately you have a good red-green deck, but you have a Muldrifter, and of course you want to play your Muldrifter. So I have, if you get Etched Oracle and Skyreach Manta, or just the right combination of powerful cards, playing 4 or 5 colors is not out of control if you have enough fixing, if you have enough ways. Basically, you don't want to go less than 3 on any color for the most part. I don't like playing, the bare minimum is 2 sources for 1 card, and even then I really would prefer 3. And you want to have something like 9 of your primary source and 7 or 8 of your secondary. So sometimes you do it up with just 1 primary color. That's less common, though. Usually you don't have enough cards in a color to do that.
Right.
So that's the main thing that I do, is I just separate out the rares, the fixing, the powerful cards, and the removal, and try to combine so I'm playing as much as I can of all of it, which sounds complicated, and this format kind of is, but if you break it down step by step, it gets a little easier. You just make sure you're playing your good cards and make sure you can cast your spells. That's if I had to break it down into 1 sentence, that would be it.
Okay, yeah. The way I lay out sealed pools is pretty similar to you. I separate, I put them in piles by color, vertical columns, and then I usually break them down into 3 sections. And I actually wrote about this for limited information. I'll put a link in the show notes. I took some pictures so that you could see how I did it. It works well for me. And basically I put all the cards into that. I also have a separate pile for mana fixing, and it looks like that pile is going to be quite important in this set, as you said. Enabling splashes and making sure you can cast your spells is going to be huge. So I think I'm going to, be paying extra attention to that one, where there's some sets where it's like, yeah, I got a couple mana fixers, but I'm not really planning on, bouncing over into any other colors. Then what I'll do is I'll go through each of the rows and I'll separate those into 3 groups. Real basic. The top group is top tier cards that make me want to play the color. They're reasons to go into that color. These are the bombs, the top tier removal, the really good like uncommons that make you want to play it. The middle group are the cards that I would call like our C's, for our set reviews, are the cards that are probably going to make the cut in the deck but aren't really exciting. And then the bottom group are the cards that I probably am not going to play unless something weird happens. And so I just go through really quickly and do that. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just like, okay, these are really good. These ones are fine. These ones aren't that exciting. And I just sort of go through, and then that lets me just sort of step back for a moment. And the rares are in there too. A lot of them are at the top. Some of them are gone. I'll usually just take that bottom pile of cards and just get rid of them. I'll revisit those later, but I think it's just better to cut out the chaff and just to look at the stuff that you're realistically considering playing. It just helps clear what you can see. So that leaves me with, all 5 colors, and then I've got them in 2 different piles, basically, the really good stuff and the stuff that's probably going to make the cut. And that gives me a decent idea of what my pool wants to do, because, if any of the colors has 3 or 4 cards at the top, like that's probably going to make it right there. It also just shows me how many cards I have, because occasionally you'll open a pool where you've got, 2 great cards at the top, but then you'll notice that you've kind of only got 5 cards or 6 cards total from the color that you really want, and it's just not deep enough, to play as one of your main colors. Now, maybe that's your splash color, right? That's something you could consider in that type of scenario. Anyway, and then I'll narrow it down to the 2 to 3 colors that I want to play. And then, like you said, you've got to put in this extra fold of, okay, well, which fixing am I playing and what am I splashing for, which adds a layer of complexity to it. But hey, building sealed pools isn't easy. It's a skill. And that's why the people that are really good at it have an edge over the people that aren't. You need to work your way through, but then I just take it from there and start, breaking it down into creatures and mana curve builds and stuff like that. But pretty similar to what you do. But I find that works well for me to separate them into those piles, just so that I can get the stuff I'm realistically not going to play out of there, and then get a look at what the colors want me to do, as well as what my mana fixing looks like. What about general strategy stuff for sealed, and especially for what you would anticipate for this?
One note for this format is that we just talked about, spent over an hour talking about 2-color synergy decks. Mm-hmm. I've done a bunch of sealed pools now, and I was a 2-color synergy deck exactly one time. So about 1 out of 8 or so.
Yeah.
And those were the ones that I actually played a match of. I built a couple more where I didn't play matches, so I have a little less data there, but I don't think you want to look for one of these 2-color decks. And the reason, well, there are a lot of reasons. One is the reason that we keep going back to about sealed, which is don't try to build draft decks, because your opponents just have more removal. They'll bust up your synergy decks. They'll bust up your aggro curve. The other is you're not going to have as many, and again, this is lumping aggro as into the synergy pile, which is, for an aggro deck, you're not going to have enough 2-drops, and you're not going to have a good enough curve. For a synergy deck, you're not going to have enough, cards that care about spirits, or enough spirits. And sometimes that will not be the case. I mean, actually, the deck I built was Black-White Spirits, because I ended up just having a deck that had 2 Scuttling Deaths, a Moonlight Strider, 3 Plagued Rusalkas. And that's just not going to happen very often. But when it does, sure, take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. For the most part, you should not do it. And for my sanity, don't try to build the Red-White Equipment deck.
Right.
Not only do I not like the deck to begin with, this is a format where your opponents are guaranteed to have 5 removal spells in their deck, if not 8.
Yeah, and that's a huge deal, right? When you consider it that way, and you look at the fact that each person that opens, certain removal spells, you're talking about your Dismembers, for example, which is effectively colorless if they want it to be, and then also just the good removal spells in all the colors except for apparently green. They're all going to get played. Those are all going to be in everybody's deck. Sometimes you face a draft deck that just didn't end up with very much removal at all, but any removal open and sealed is going to get played. It's going to be one of the reasons that people choose the colors that they choose, so you're going to see that stuff. And that means that if you go for one of these, one strategy that can work pretty well in draft, I know people that draft it just almost no matter what the set is, they'll draft it, which is a bunch of small creatures, and then they draft pump spells, combat tricks basically, and removal, and just try to push through a bunch of damage and just win like that. It can be a winning strategy even from set to set. But if you're trying to do that in sealed, and everybody's playing their bigger stuff, and everybody's a step slower than you, and everybody's playing all their removal, you're going to get wrecked. And that is just not what you want to be doing. Those combat tricks just plummet in value. I mean, you just don't want to play those. Like, it's weird, but you just don't want to play the, my creature gets +2/+2 and flying. Yeah, they go away, and they actually become bad in many cases just because of the amount of removal that you're going to play, and also because your opponents are often going to be a step or two slower than you, and that's not necessarily a good thing. You'd think, oh, that's great, I'm going to run them over, right? My deck's going to be fast, but you know what? You need critical mass of cheap creatures and combat tricks. You need to be able to cast all your spells, and you even need a decent draw to make that work, and those things just don't come together in sealed very often. And the thing that I've noticed too is I've had a lot of people show me a sealed deck that resembled a draft deck, and they were quite proud of it. They said, look, I've basically got a draft deck here. And when you lay it out, there are similarities. The problem is when you get up to the 19th and 20th card that you're playing, if that just falls off and those aren't on curve, for example, or they're cards that you just would never play in that type of aggressive or assertive draft deck normally, your deck can go from looking pretty decent to actually being quite bad. Like, if you come up a little bit short, you're all the way short on those type of decks. And I think that that's the number one thing. And I think that this format especially is going to reward raw power over cheap consistency. I think that people are going to be playing a lot of colors. I think they're going to be able to get to their colors pretty efficiently, and they're going to be resolving some really powerful stuff. And you're going to have a pretty extraordinary pool if you're going to play an aggressive 2-color deck to try to beat those. And I don't think that those are going to come up that often at all.
No, I don't either. I think sometimes you will find a deck that resembles one of these synergy decks, but it's going to be more like a light touch of it instead of just a full-on deck. I actually made some notes, some format-specific notes here.
Oh, yeah, go for it. One
is always play Dismember. If you open this card in your pool, it's in your deck. Even if you're not playing black, 1 mana, pay 4 life, give a creature -5/-5 at instant speed. That card's absurd. So
yep.
There's no number of Dismembers where I wouldn't play them. If I had 4, I'd probably just be playing black. So
good point.
I don't see it happening. Tezzeret's Gambit is another one. That's 3 in a blue Phyrexian mana to draw 2 cards, then proliferate. So if you're not playing blue, it's 3 colorless, lose 2 life, draw 2 cards, which doesn't sound insane, but if you're playing a 3-color deck, having a colorless card that gets you out of Mana Screw is very good, and you're often going to have little bits of synergy with Tezzeret's Gambit. Sometimes you'll just have an Ever-Flowing Chalice, the XX artifact that has X counters and taps for, a mana for each counter, or you'll have a Sphere of the Suns, or you'll have a random Graft creature. So I think that, especially in Sealed where card draw is good, you're going to play Tezzeret's Gambit almost all the time. I guess I could see leaving it on the sideboard every now and then, but for the most part, you should play this card, even if you're not playing blue.
Okay.
On the other hand, Blinding Soul Eater, the 3-mana 1/3 that costs a white Phyrexian mana to use to tap that creature. Don't play that unless you're playing white, unless you're very aggressive. If you listen to what we said the last couple minutes, you're probably not going to be doing that. So in general, you want to be playing white. Just paying 2 life to tap a creature is just not a good deal. It doesn't really stop you from dying, which is what tappers do half the time or more than half the time in Sealed. So I don't like that.
That's a close one. But yeah, you're right. The problem is that you often find yourself tapping down a 3-powered creature, paying 2 life to do it. You're not really getting ahead there.
Right. And Scuttling Death, the 5-mana 4/2 with Soul Shift 4 that can sack to give a creature -1/-1. I like this card a lot. I think that you should play it if you have even as few as 2 other targets to get back. 2 spirits that are cheaper than it.
Wow, okay. Yeah, because that one's definitely not obvious. At first blush, I would say that card doesn't look good at all, but after hearing you describe it in the Spirits deck, I can certainly see the upside.
Well, the thing is, 5-mana 4/2 that sacks to give a creature -1/-1 isn't heinously beyond the curve. It's not good. You wouldn't play that card specifically, but if it has, a chance of drawing you a good card, not just drawing a random card, drawing you a good card, which ideally these are, then I don't mind it too much. I would want 3 or 4 targets before I get excited, but I think I would play it if I had a Moonlit Strider and a Thief of Hope or something like that.
Okay.
Though you're probably not playing the Thief of Hope at that point. So let's say Kami of Ancient Law, because Kami of Ancient Law is another one that I think is very good. That's the 1 and a white for a 2/2 that sacks to kill an enchantment. Just because there's Arrests, Oblivion Rings, and Narcolepsies running around. people are just going to play all these cards. And Pillory of the Sleepless, the 1 white black passivism, enchanted creature can't attack or block, that makes them lose a life every turn.
Yeah, and people are playing all of those. Like, and anybody that can cast those is playing them.
I would definitely always main deck Conviction Law if I was white, and that then makes Scholarly Death more appealing if you've got a target or two. Or 2 or 3 targets, rather.
Okay, cool.
Eldrazi tokens into expensive cards is a good strategy, and you don't really need to do a whole lot, because cards like Ulamog's Crusher or the 8-drop are pretty close to being playable and sealed already, especially if you have a mana ramp or 2, and the Eldrazi tokens just make it that much better, because those are double ramps.
Right.
So, and then cards like Kozilek's Predator and Dread Drone are just highly playable. You should just be playing them if you're those colors. So, in general, I have had a good success with Eldrazi tokens plus moderately expensive spells. I don't love Alloy Mirror. This is a card I think a lot of people are going to naturally gravitate towards.
I think a lot of people are going to be playing this one.
It's 3 colors for a 2/2 and taps for any color. If you're playing 3 or more colors, it's okay to play this card. I'm not saying don't play it, but I just don't love it. I don't think it's insane. There's just putting my mana fixing on a 3-drop that can die to removal and doesn't have haste, because it's not like an artifact that could just tap right away to cast your splash card, means that you're just waiting a turn to do it. The 2/2 body's not helping all that much. You're playing it for the fixing. So I don't love Alloy Mirror. I don't count it as one of the premium mana fixers.
Okay.
And the last one is one I've seen people do way too often, which is play Darksteel Axe. The 1 mana equipped creature gets +2/+0, equip 2.
Whoa, you're saying not play it?
I think your default is that you should not be playing this.
Whoa, that's controversial. Explain yourself.
The explanation is people have removal. You're not going to be playing an 18 creature deck or a 17 creature deck. You're probably playing like a 12 creature deck because you have such good removal of your own. This card doesn't do anything. It makes your 3/3 into a 5/3, but you're not playing very many 2/2s that do nothing. Your creatures are generally high quality and your spells are high quality, so I would not want to cut either for a Darksteel Axe. I think that Darksteel Axe is going to get overplayed, and I think you're going to win more if you leave it in the sideboard. Yes, if you have a lot of Eldrazi tokens, or you have a deck that has cards that really want Darksteel Axe, or you have a deck that just has a lot of creatures, gets a little better. But in general, you win sealed matches by them drawing Darksteel Axe, you drawing an extra removal spell, or them drawing Darksteel Axe, you killing their 3 creatures they draw and having an extra creature. So I think that you should cast a critical eye on equipment, and Darksteel Axe is one that especially looks very appealing and that I don't think people should play.
Okay, interesting. That'll be. I'm curious to see how that turns out, because I'm definitely in the camp of just playing it by default. But I can see what you're saying. If it becomes an attrition game, that card is pretty bad. I had a couple of things to add before we wrapped up as well. We already talked about not playing those aggressive decks and trying to stay away from that. But also the other thing that I wanted to mention, of course, were bombs, right? And we talked about bombs and sealed when we talked about it before, but it's certainly true here. I want to throw something at you here. Karn Liberated is in this set. Every friggin' copy of that card that gets opened and sealed basically ever is going to get played. When we go to the GP, everybody that gets a Karn in their pool is going to be playing Karn pretty much. That's a kind of huge bomb that you're going to see everywhere. And there's others too, right? I mean, there's,
I would actually be willing to bet real quick that because the Grand Prix is looking to be like 8,000 or 9,000 people, there will be some Karns in sideboards. Not because it's correct, because it likely is not.
But just based on the numbers?
There's just so many people.
No, you're probably right. You're probably right.
Game.
You're probably right. But you get my point, right? Like, there's a lot of Karns.
Your point is extremely valid.
And they're going to be in there. Yeah, and then there's other types of bombs that you mentioned earlier. Comet Storm was one you mentioned. That's a game ender for sure. Pretty easily. There's, of course, a whole bunch of great creatures that you can have as well. Now, you're going to need answers for these. So how do you answer the bombs in this format? Well, first off, there's removal. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to play your good removal. That was never really in question anyway. It's not like you're like, oh, I need answers for bombs. I'll play Oblivion Ring. Like, you're going to play that no matter what. So I think if you're listening to this podcast and you've played Limited at all, you know that removal is going to make it the cut anyway. So that's straightforward. But then there's counter spells. We talked about them when we talked about the blue answers stuff for the blue archetypes above, but there's basically there's technically 4 because there's Cryptic Command at rare as well. But of the common and uncommon ones, there's Stoic Rebuttal, Mana Leak, and Remand. And if you look through these, they kind of get interesting. I think Stoic Rebuttal is just the best one. It's a hard counter. It's 1 blue counter target spell. It can be cheaper if you've got Metalcraft, but whatever. By the time your opponent's casting those big game enders, you've got Stoic Rebuttal and it stops them. And that's what you really need to happen here. Now, Mana Leak is pretty close to that too. Mana Leak is better in the early stages of the game, just in case your opponent has one of the cheaper, really good threats. There are some of those, or if they're just a cheap, more streamlined deck, which you won't face too often, but you'll be happy you have a Mana Leak if you are facing one of those down. And then it can counter a big spell late, it's going to be pretty rough for them to get Karn through a Mana Leak really at any point during the game, but it will happen at some point that they just keep playing lands and maybe they've seen the Mana Leak from you and they can play around it and it doesn't end up being a hard counter for it. Still, I like Mana Leak. I think it's fine for that. It's just not quite as good as Stoic Rebuttal at serving this particular role. And then there's Remand, which I think is just not very good in that sense, just because they just get to recast it and you're looking for an actual answer to a bomb because if the game's going to go long and they're going to be casting their Karn or whatever, you need to actually be able to kill it, and Remand doesn't do that. Which is not great. I suppose if you're able to, keep attacking or something, Remand gets better. The other way that you can deal with it is Hand Disruption. And there really isn't any.
Yeah, it's surprising, actually. This is exactly the kind of set where you would expect some kind of duress effect.
I would expect it, and I looked and there isn't. There's Waking Nightmare, which is just a Mind Rot reprint. It's 2 and a black sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards. That's not really going to be reliable enough to get bombs. It can certainly help mitigate it. It doesn't mean you never play the card, but it's for the purposes of what I'm discussing here, which is how do I answer my opponent's bombs? You just don't have options as far as that goes. So it gets kind of interesting. The counterspells seem to be carrying a bit more weight than they normally would, but I will say that a lot of the removal does a pretty darn good job of taking out those big threats kind of no matter what they are. We went through a bunch of the removal earlier, but, looking through some of the cards from white, you've got Arrest. So any creature you're basically just taking out completely. You've got Oblivion Ring, which will just take out anything. And then in the right spots, a Dispatch will do the same for a creature, and even a Celestial Purge can take out certain creatures out of the sideboard. For black, Bone Splinters in a pinch will get the job done if it happens to be a creature. Dismember kills most creatures that you care about. There are a few that are big enough to not care. And then, of course, you've got your Karn Liberateds of the world that don't get the job done. But you do get Spread the Sickness and Wrecking Ball, which we talked about, which can outright kill something. Quag Sickness can too. But again, your Planeswalkers are going to survive. But hey, that's part of the reason why they're so good. Now, when it comes to red, it's not quite as straightforward. It's much better at killing smaller threats, but it does venture up into medium to big range in this set. You've got Fiery Fall, which does 5 to a creature. Burst Lightning can do 4 to a creature, which does kill some of the bombs you care about. And Tribal Flames can do up to 5 to a creature. And then I mentioned green. Well, you've got Plummet. And so if the bomb that you happen to be facing has flying in as a creature, then you're going to be able to kill it with that. But for the most part, just make sure that you're cognizant of the fact that you do need to take care of the bombs, and hopefully I've outlined some of the best ways to do it. But I think the most interesting part is just that you are going to be relying on some of these counterspells maybe a little more than you normally would. That being said, don't fire off your Oblivion Ring unless you're sure that it's the thing that you want to kill. You're going to have to use those catch-all threats for the really big stuff, which is coming. That's the thing. I think you should just assume that your opponent has at least a bomb or two in their deck, and if the game's kind of going inevitably long, they're going to find it, and you're going to need to have an answer, so you don't want to get hasty with your Oblivion Rings and the like.
Yep, completely agree. I think that formats like this, Karn is an insane bomb. There are others. It's not to the point where you can't use Oblivion Ring on a 4/4. Mm-hmm. But it is the sort of thing where when you're playing game 1 of a sealed match where you don't really know your opponent's deck, yeah, you have to use your removal judiciously. There are cards that are pretty ridiculous running around. That's right.
Before we go, Luis, card you're most excited to play? Just what comes to your head?
Scuttling Death. Scuttle.
That's great. Mine is Mystic Snake. I like that card a lot. I want to get people with Mystic Snake.
The original Ambush Viper?
yeah, exactly. Maybe even better than Death Touch on Mystic Snake, but
how dare you?
I am. Sorry. All right, so that's going to do it. Hopefully it was helpful for you guys to join our discussion with us and try to get more information as we move closer to getting Modern Masters packs in our hands, even if it is for a brief period of time. The set looks pretty exciting. the bar's very high. Modern Masters, I loved drafting original Modern Masters. I still would just draft it on the spot anytime. I'm skeptical that Modern Masters 2015 is going to be able to live up to that level just because I thought they nailed it so well. But I'm certainly open to it doing that, and I'm hoping that it does. And I'm excited to find out.
You're trying to find the open signals and go with that.
Indeed. What else is new? I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you each and every week by channelfireball.com. Make sure you check out channelfireball.com for the full selection of singles, sealed product, and even supplies. If you happen to need those, you can pick up those cards for your standard deck or maybe your commander deck. Get some booster packs like maybe even Modern Masters 2015 to get a draft going with your friends. They ship it out to you quickly, and they've got solid competitive prices there on a nice website. And don't forget, you can also find a bunch of free Magic content over there. Videos by me, by Luis, by a bunch of the top pros in the game, and a bunch of articles that go up every single day. Check out channelfireball.com for all of that. All right. That's going to do it for the Modern Masters 2015 set primer. That was a fun one. I like this format, Luis. I think we should revisit this when it appears. When Wizards throws us set and then small set, or, not small, but mini release set, all leading up to Magic Origins, I think it's prudent for us to have a different way to do these ones that don't get to stick around forever. And I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, and we can decide whether we want to do a set review once Magic Origins comes out.
or the show at all. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next week.
So, Marshall, are you aware of what Mindslaver is?
I am.
So, Mindslaver, for those who aren't aware, because Marshall is, he just knows everything apparently, is 6 mana. It's an artifact. And you pay 4 and tap it and sacrifice it. And you take target player's next turn.
You were wrong. Your description was wrong.
Well, how is it wrong?
It's a legendary artifact.
True. I actually thought that when I was saying it. I'm like, oh, this is legendary. But I'm like, oh, no one's going to care unless they're like super pedantic.
Well, I thought you knew what the card did, so.
It's only legendary for flavor reasons. That's never in play.
That's true. That's a good point.
There was a time when you could keep your Mindslaver in play to stop them from playing theirs, but you also just use your Mindslaver, which was better. Anyway, the point is not to read the text of Mindslaver, though that is part of the point, I suppose. So what Mindslaver does is lets you take your opponent's next turn. What Mindslaver is most frequently used at when I say the words Mindslaver is to describe a game where your opponent made all the decisions you would want them to make. For example, you have combat. You attack with all your creatures. You have all your creatures get +1, +1. They block your 2/2 with their 2/3. They block your 3/3 with their 3/4, and so on down the line. You cast this, all their creatures die. It's like you Mindslavered your opponent, but that case is not the exact perfect definition because it might not have been wrong. Your opponent, basically played to the board without thinking what's in your hand. The true Mindslaver is when your opponent does stuff like double block your 4/4 with a 2/2 and a 1/1, and which sometimes happens. So just so you know, when people say my opponent was Mindslaver, they're very, very rarely meaning literal Mindslaver. I guess if they're playing Modern, they could be playing a Tron deck, but for the most part, being Mindslavered means you are. You're getting to play your opponent's cards. Like your opponent, you're making all the decisions for your opponent in the worst possible way for them. So I bring this up because I have a couple stories involving Mindslaver that did not turn out quite as well as my opponents would have hoped. So the first was at
this is going to be good.
My very first Grand Prix, Anaheim, which was extended, essentially, kind of like Modern for those who have started playing after the death of Extended. Rest in peace. And my opponent was playing a deck with Tinker, which lets you put any artifact into play from your deck, and a ton of artifacts that produce mana. It can produce 20 mana in a turn, whatever. Mm-hmm. I was playing a black-green deck that had 6 copies of Viridian Shaman, essentially. I was not playing a very powerful deck. All my deck was Viridian Shamans, which is 2 and a green for a 2/2 when you play it, destroy an artifact, and Uktabi Orangutan, which is 2 and a green for a 2/2 when you play it, destroy an artifact. My deck was full of bad cards. Makes Mindslaver much less effective against me. My opponent...
Your Mindslaver tech was to play a bunch of bad cards?
It worked like a charm, because look, I was playing against one of these Tinker decks. My opponent played Mindslaver, tinkered for Mindslaver, and Mindslavered me, assuming this was going to be a big finish. My response was to cast Vampiric Tutor, which lets me search my deck for any card and put it on top. and put a Molder Slug on top. This is another card that I was playing in a format full of the card Tinker. The card Tinker and the card Molder Slug, just put those side by side, if you will. So my opponent's option on their turn, on now my turn, was to cast Molder Slug or do nothing. my deck, alternately, they could have cast an Uktabi Orangutan. They were the only ones with artifacts. It would just destroy an artifact. So my opponent's Mindsaver did not work out particularly well.
That's amazing.
They could make me cast cards, but all my cards still did what they said and were bad for my opponent. So that was one of the most disappointing Mindslavers. But I think the actual most disappointing Mindslaver was at my next Grand Prix. I don't know how these all happened in a row, but this was in Mirrodin Block Limited, original Mirrodin. I'm playing for day 2, and this is a big deal. This is my second Grand Prix. I really wanted to make day 2. It was Grand Prix Oakland, which is my hometown, and so I was really tense. My opponent, in a really close game, plays Mindslaver and activates it.
In limited?
In limited.
Oh my god. Which
doesn't sound good. And then they attacked me with a flyer, and then they passed the turn, and they untapped, they drew, and they're like, gonna win the race. So they're like, whatever. I just tap you out, and you say go. And I'm like, well, that's not all that happens. They're like, well, what else happens? I was like, well, my Juggernaut has to attack.
Oh, no.
Juggernaut's a 4-mana 5/3 and has a drawback that must attack every turn. If able. Because the if able text is very necessary. So my opponent died on their Mindslaver turn. They literally had control of every game action of mine, and they died.
That's incredible.
It is incredibly difficult to die on a Mindslaver turn. But they managed. So hopefully next time Mindslaver comes up, it is not you getting Mindslavered, and hopefully you never happen to lose on a turn where you Mindslavered your opponent.